In the fog-choked shadows of Blackthorn Manor, a priceless sapphire brooch vanishes, and with it, a family's darkest secrets begin to unravel. Why does the butler warn Hercule Poirot to leave the truth buried? Who among the eccentric guests, a sharp-tongued novelist, a secretive governess, a debt-ridden nephew, or a disgraced colonel hides a motive for theft? As Poirot's little gray cells probe deeper, he faces an impossible choice: expose a scandal that could destroy lives or protect the innocent by guarding a lie. Can justice prevail when every truth comes at a cost? The game begins, and no one is above suspicion. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. The fog clung to the Yorkshire moors like a jealous lover, its tendrils curling around the gnarled trees and sinking into the damp earth, muffling the world in a shroud of gray. Hercule Poirot, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the sodden ground, adjusted his overcoat and peered through the mist from the window of the rattling carriage. The driver, a taciturn man with a face like weathered granite, had spoken little since picking him up at the lonely station of Thornwick. Poirot, however, was not one to be deterred by silence or gloom. His mind, sharp as the creases in his immaculate suit, churned with anticipation. The letter in his pocket, penned in an elegant but urgent hand, had promised a mystery worthy of his talents. The letter had arrived at his London flat 3 days prior, delivered by a courier who vanished into the bustle of the city before Poirot could question him. Signed by Lady Eleanor Blackthorn. It was both an invitation and a plea. She requested his presence at Blackthorn Manor, her ancestral home, to resolve a matter of utmost delicacy. The words had danced before Poirot's eyes: a moral dilemma, a secret threatening to unravel, and a vague mention of a missing family heirloom, a sapphire brooch of inestimable value. Yet it was not the promise of a lost jewel that stirred Poirot's curiosity, but the undercurrent of fear in Lady Eleanor's words. As though the brooch were a mere symptom of a deeper malaise, the carriage lurched to a stop, and the driver's gruff voice broke the silence. Blackthorn Manor, sir. Poirot stepped onto the gravel drive, his cane tapping rhythmically as he surveyed the looming silhouette of the manor. It was a Gothic edifice, all sharp angles and towering chimneys, its stone facade weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Ivy clung to the walls like a desperate embrace, and the windows glowed faintly, as if reluctant to reveal the secrets within. The air carried a chill that was not entirely due to the autumnal damp, and Poirot's mustache twitched as he sensed the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. The massive oak door creaked open before he could knock, revealing a butler, whose gaunt frame and sallow complexion seemed to belong to the manor itself. Monsieur Poirot, the man said, his voice low and precise, like the ticking of a clock. I am Grayson, Lady Eleanor's butler. She awaits you in the drawing room. Please, follow me. Poirot inclined his head, noting the butler's stiff posture and the slight tremor in his hands as he took Poirot's coat. Merci, Monsieur Grayson. The journey, it has been long, but the welcome, it is most intriguing. His eyes, sharp as cut glass, caught the butler's fleeting glance toward the darkened staircase. A warning, perhaps, or merely nerves. Poirot filed the observation away, as he did all things, in the orderly compartments of his mind. The interior of Blackthorn Manor was a study in faded opulence. The foyer boasted a chandelier that glittered like a constellation, but its crystals were dulled by dust. Portraits of stern-faced blackthorns lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow Poirot as Grayson led him through a labyrinth of corridors. The air smelled of old wood, wax polish, and something less tangible: regret, perhaps, or secrets too long buried. They passed a library where shelves groaned under the weight of leather-bound tomes, and a conservatory where dying ferns wilted in the gloom. At last they reached the drawing room. Its heavy velvet curtains drawn against the encroaching fog. Lady Eleanor Blackthorne stood by the fireplace, her silhouette framed by the flickering flames. She was a woman of late middle age, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her posture regal despite the lines of strain etched around her eyes. Her dress, a deep emerald silk, shimmered as she turned to greet him. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice warm but tinged with urgency. "I cannot express my gratitude for your coming. I fear we are in dire need of your unique perspective." Poirot bowed, his movements precise. "Madame, the pleasure, it is mine. Your letter? It spoke of a dilemma most curious." Hercule Poirot, he does not resist such a challenge. He smiled, but his eyes were already scanning the room, noting the other figures present, a disparate assembly of guests, each watching him with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, or unease. Lady Eleanor gestured to the group. "Allow me to introduce my guests, Monsieur Poirot. They are here for the weekend, though I confess the occasion is less festive than I had hoped." Her smile faltered, and she clasped her hands tightly, as if to steady herself. First was Colonel Reginald Hawthorne, a barrel-chested man with a bristling mustache in the military, bearing that suggested he was more at home on a battlefield than in a drawing room. His eyes, however, were restless, darting to the windows as if expecting an ambush. "Poirot, eh?" he barked, his voice like a cannon shot. "Heard of you? Sharp fellow, they say. Hope you're not here to stir up trouble." His laugh was forced, and Poirot noted the slight clench of his fist. Next was Miss Clara Vaughan, novelist whose sharp features and sharper tongue had made her a darling of London's literary circles. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely, and her eyes glittered with a mix of amusement and defiance. "Monsieur Poirot," she purred, extending a gloved hand, "I trust you'll find our little gathering more entertaining than one of my novels, though I warn you, I'm rather good at spotting plot twists." Her smile was a challenge, and Poirot returned it with a polite nod, sensing a mind as calculating as his own. Then there was Miss Emily Hart, the governess, a pale young woman with mousy brown hair and eyes that seemed to flinch from direct contact. She murmured a greeting, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. Poirot observed the faint tremor in her fingers and the way she glanced at the final guest, a handsome young man lounging by the window. Victor Blackthorne, Lady Eleanor's nephew, was all charm and careless elegance. His dark hair fell artfully over his brow, and his smile was disarming, though Poirot noted a flicker of calculation in his green eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," Victor said, his voice smooth as velvet, "Aunt Eleanor's told me all about you. Hope you'll find our country retreat diverting, though I must warn you, the moors can be unsettling." His laugh was light, but it didn't reach his eyes. Grayson, the butler, hovered near the door, his presence unobtrusive yet omnipresent. Poirot's gaze lingered on him, noting the way. His eyes flicked to Lady Eleanor, as if awaiting a signal. The room was a tapestry of tensions, each thread pulling in a different direction. Poirot's little gray cells were already at work, untangling the knots. Lady Eleanor cleared her throat, drawing attention back to herself. "Monsieur Poirot, I must be frank. The matter that brings you here is both delicate and urgent. A family heirloom, a sapphire brooch, has gone missing. It is not merely its value, though. It is priceless, but its significance to our family. I fear its loss is no accident, and I suspect one of my guests may be involved." Her voice wavered, and she looked away, as if ashamed to voice such a betrayal. The room stilled. Colonel Hawthorne's mustache twitched. Clara Vaughan's smile tightened. Emily Hart shrank further into her chair, and Victor's fingers paused on the stem of his wineglass. Grayson, ever the shadow, shifted slightly, his expression unreadable. Poirot's eyes moved from face to face, cataloging each reaction. "Madame," he said, his voice calm but resonant, "the loss of such an heirloom It is most distressing. But Hercule Poirot, he does not believe in accidents where human motives are concerned. Tell me, when was this brooch last seen, lady? Eleanor hesitated, her fingers brushing the pearls at her throat. 2 nights ago, during dinner. I wore it, as I often do for special occasions. I placed it in its case in my boudoir afterward, but when I checked yesterday morning, it was gone. The case was empty, and the lock, undisturbed. Poirot's mustache curved slightly, a sign his mind was racing. Undisturbed, you say? Most curious. And who, madame, had access to this boudoir? Only myself and Grayson, she replied, glancing at the butler, and, of course, the maid, Lucy, who cleans the room. But Lucy has been with us for years, and I trust her implicitly. Grayson inclined his head, but Poirot caught the brief tightening of his jaw. And the guests, madame, they were all present 2 nights ago. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. All of them. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping a deliberate rhythm on the polished floor. Then, madame, we must consider that the thief, he is among us, but fear not Hercule Poirot will uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it is hidden. Colonel Hawthorne snorted. Sounds like a lot of fuss over a bauble. Surely, Eleanor, you've insurance for such things. It is not merely a bauble, Lady Eleanor snapped, her composure cracking. It is a symbol of our family's honor, Reginald. You, of all people, should understand that. The colonel flushed, and Poirot noted the exchange with interest. Clara Vaughan leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Oh, this is delightful. Real mystery, right here in this dreary old pile. Tell me, Monsieur Poirot, do you suspect one of us already? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Mademoiselle, I suspect everyone until I have reason not to. The little gray cells, they do not rush to judgment. Victor laughed, raising his glass. To your little gray cells, then. May they find our thief before we all go mad with suspicion. Emily Hart said nothing, her eyes fixed on the floor, but Poirot noticed her hands clenched tighter. The room was a powder keg, and the missing brooch was the spark. He turned to Lady Eleanor. Madame, with your permission, I will begin my inquiries tomorrow. For now, I suggest we retire. The mind, it works best when rested. Lady Eleanor nodded, relief flickering across her face. Of course, Monsieur Poirot, Grayson will show you to your room. As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his eyes sweeping the room one last time. Grayson approached, his voice low. A word of caution, sir. Not all truths are meant to be uncovered. Some secrets, they're better left buried. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Monsieur Grayson, Hercule Poirot does not fear the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried. But I thank you for your concern. The butler's face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He bowed and retreated, leaving Poirot alone by the dying fire. The fog pressed against the windows, and the manor creaked like a living thing, its secrets whispering in the shadows. Poirot adjusted his cufflinks, his mind already mapping the maze of motives and lies. The sapphire brooch was merely the beginning, a thread in a tapestry far more intricate than Lady Eleanor suspected. Tomorrow he would begin to unravel it as he ascended the grand staircase. The portraits seemed to watch him, their painted eyes gleaming with silent warnings. Poirot smiled to himself. The game, it had begun, and Hercule Poirot was ready to play. Chapter 2. Shadows of Suspicion. The air in Blackthorn Manor hung heavy with the scent of old wood and wax polish, mingling with the faint, damp musk of the Yorkshire moors that pressed against the manor's stone walls. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his polished shoes clicking softly against the black and white marble tiles as he surveyed the scene. The morning after his arrival had dawned gray, with mist curling like ghostly fingers around the manor's Gothic spires. The enigmatic letter from Lady Eleanor Blackthorne still burned in his mind, its cryptic promise of a moral dilemma tugging at his curiosity like a loose thread in a tapestry. But now, as he adjusted his bow tie and smoothed his mustache, Poirot's sharp gray eyes scanned the gathered guest, each a puzzle piece in a game that had only just begun. The butler, Mr. Grayson, hovered near the massive oaked staircase, his gaunt face pale and his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Warning from the previous night, not all truths are meant to be uncovered, echoed in Poirot's thoughts, subtle challenge to his detective's instincts. The guest, summoned to the drawing room for breakfast, moved with the uneasy grace of actors unsure of their lines. There was Colonel Reginald Harrow, a man whose military bearing seemed at odds with the nervous twitch of his fingers. Miss Clara Vaughan, the novelist, whose sharp tongue and sharper eyes suggested she saw more than she let on. Miss Emily Trent, the governess, whose timid demeanor belied a quiet intensity. And Victor Blackthorne, Lady Eleanor's nephew, whose charming smile carried a shadow of calculation. Lady Eleanor herself presided over the gathering, her regal posture and serene expression masking the tension Poirot sensed beneath her polished exterior. Breakfast was a lavish affair, served on delicate porcelain plates adorned with the Blackthorne family crest. Silver trays gleamed under the chandelier's light, bearing scones, clotted cream, and a spread of jams that shimmered like jewels. Yet the mood was anything but festive. Conversation stuttered, punctuated by the clink of cutlery and the occasional cough. Poirot, seated at Lady Eleanor's right, observed the dynamics with the precision of a watchmaker. The colonel's gaze lingered too long on the empty space where the sapphire brooch, Lady Eleanor's missing heirloom, should have rested on her velvet gown. Clara's pen scratched furiously in a small notebook, as if she were documenting the scene for her next novel. Emily kept her eyes down, her fork trembling slightly as she pushed a piece of fruit across her plate. Victor, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, his casual ease a stark contrast to the room's tension. "Mr. Poirot," Lady Eleanor said, her voice smooth but firm, "I trust you slept well, despite the unsettling circumstances of last evening." Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "Most excellently, Lady Eleanor. The mind of Hercule Poirot, it rests only when it is engaged in the pursuit of truth. And this morning I find myself most invigorated." A flicker of unease passed through the room, like a draught stirring the heavy drapes. The colonel cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "Truth, you say? Fine thing, but sometimes it's best left buried. No need to stir up trouble over a trinket, eh?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A trinket, Colonel Harrow. The sapphire brooch. It is no mere bauble. It is a symbol, n'est-ce pas, a piece of history tied to the heart of this family. And when such a thing vanishes, it is not merely the object that is lost, but the story it tells." Clara sat down, her pen, her lips curving into a sardonic smile. "Well," said Mr. Poirot, "every object has a story, and every story has a shadow. Perhaps the brooch's tale is darker than we know." Emily's fork clattered against her plate, drawing all eyes. She flushed, mumbling an apology, but Poirot noted the way her gaze darted toward Victor. Ho was sipping his coffee with studied nonchalance. Lady Eleanor's fingers tightened around her teacup, though her expression remained serene. "Enough of this," Victor said, his tone light but edged with impatience. "The brooch is gone, and we're all under suspicion, aren't we? Let's not pretend otherwise. Mr. Poirot, why don't you start asking your questions and be done with it?" Poirot's smile was polite but razor sharp. "Monsieur Victor, The questions of Hercule Poirot are not so blunt as to be thrust upon a gathering like a butcher's cleaver. No, no, they are delicate, precise, like the scalpel of a surgeon, and they began, always, with observation. With that, Poirot rose, excusing himself to begin his investigation. The guests dispersed, their movements betraying varying degrees of unease. The colonel strode toward the library, muttering about needing a cigar. Clara vanished upstairs, her notebook clutched to her chest. Emily lingered, offering to help clear the table, though her hands shook as she stacked plates. Victor, with a careless wave, announced he was going for a walk in the gardens. Lady Eleanor remained seated, her gaze fixed on the empty space at her collar, where the sapphire brooch should have been. Poirot's first stop was the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and dominated by a massive fireplace. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and wood smoke. The colonel stood by a window, staring out at the mist-shrouded moors, a cigar unlit in his hand. "Colonel Harrow," Poirot said, his voice soft but commanding attention. "You spoke of the brooch as a trinket, yet your eyes, they betray a deeper concern. Tell me, what is it you know of this sapphire?" The colonel turned, his weathered face tightening. "I know it's caused nothing but trouble. Eleanor's husband, God rest his soul, was obsessed with that damned thing. Said it was the pride of the Blackthorn line. But pride's a dangerous thing, Mr. Poirot. Leads to all sorts of folly." Poirot tilted his head. "Folly, you say? And what folly did you observe last evening during your walk on the grounds?" The colonel's jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around the cigar. "I walked the east garden, as I always do after dinner. Clears the head. Saw nothing out of the ordinary. It's just the usual shadows and mist. And yet," Poirot pressed, "your boots, Colonel, they were caked with mud this morning. Not the fine gravel of the east garden path, but the rich, dark soil of the moors. A curious discrepancy, Ned." The colonel's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You're a sharp one, aren't you? Fine. I wandered a bit farther than the garden. Got turned around in the fog. Nothing more to it." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course, Colonel. The fog, it can be most disorienting. Mercy for your candor." Leaving the colonel to his cigar, Poirot moved to the drawing room, where he found Clara Vaughan perched on a velvet settee, her notebook open on her lap. Her pen hovered over the page, but her eyes were fixed on Poirot's, sharp and assessing. "Miss Vaughan," Poirot began, settling into an armchair opposite her, "your words at breakfast, they suggest a keen interest in the stories behind objects. Tell me, what story do you imagine for this missing brooch?" Clara's lips twitched, as if debating whether to play along. "It's a sapphire like that? It's not just a jewel. It's a secret, Mr. Poirot. A secret someone in this house is desperate to keep buried. Maybe it's tied to a betrayal, a debt, or something uglier. I'd wager it's more than just a family heirloom." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A wager, you say? And what do you know of secrets, Miss Vaughan? Your pen, it moves with such purpose. Are you writing the truth or crafting a fiction to conceal?" Clara laughed, a low, throaty sound. "You're good, Mr. Poirot, but I'm just a novelist, not a criminal. I observe, I imagine, I write, that's all. As for last night, I was in my room working on my manuscript, alone." "Alone," Poirot repeated, his tone neutral. "And yet, your window overlooks the greenhouse, does it not? A fine vantage point to observe, say, a late-night visitor to the gardens." Clara's smile faltered, her fingers tightening around her pen. "I didn't see anything, if that's what you're implying. The mist was too thick. Besides, I was lost in my work." Poirot nodded, rising with a polite bow. "Of course, Miss Vaughan. The imagination, it can be a most absorbing companion. Mercy." His next stop was the governess, Miss Emily Trent, whom he found in the schoolroom, tidying a stack of books with nervous precision. Her pale face flushed as Poirot entered, her hands fluttering like startled birds. "Miss Trent," Poirot said, gently, "you are, I think, a woman of quiet strength, yet this morning you are most unsettled. The brooch, it means something to you, does it not?" Emily's eyes widened, her lips parting as if to protest, then closing. I don't know anything about it, Mr. Poirot. I was in my room last night, preparing lessons. Heard nothing, saw nothing." Poirot stepped closer, his voice soft but insistent. "And yet, mademoiselle, your eyes, they dart toward Monsieur Victor whenever his name is mentioned. Is there something you wish to share? Something, perhaps, that weighs upon your heart?" Emily's hands twisted together, her voice barely a whisper. "Victor, he's kind, but he's troubled. I don't know anything about the brooch, I swear. Please, Mr. Poirot, don't think I'm involved." Poirot studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you, Miss Trent, but if you see or hear anything, you will come to Poirot. The truth, it is a heavy burden to carry alone." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Poirot made his way to the gardens, where Victor Blackthorne lounged against a stone bench, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. The young man's easy charm was tempered by a restlessness that Poirot noted immediately. "Monsieur Victor," Poirot said, approaching with a measured step, "you seem most at ease. Yet the disappearance of your aunt's brooch, it does not trouble you?" Victor exhaled a plume of smoke, his smile lazy but guarded. "Troubled me? Not particularly. It's just a piece of jewelry, Mr. Poirot. Aunt Eleanor's got plenty more where that came from. Besides, I was out here last night, enjoying the air. Didn't see a thing." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "The air, you say? And yet, the greenhouse, it is not so far from here. A curious place, Nan. A place where one might hide something, or someone." Victor's smile faltered, his fingers flicking the cigarette to the ground. "You're fishing, Mr. Poirot? I don't know anything about the brooch or the greenhouse. You're wasting your time." "Time," Poirot said softly, "is never wasted when one seeks the truth. Merci, Monsieur Victor." As the day wore on, Poirot's inquiries deepened, each conversation peeling back layers of half-truths and evasions. The Colonel's military precision seemed to falter under scrutiny, his story of a foggy walk unraveling as Poirot noted the absence of mud on the garden paths. Clara's sharp wit masked a nervous edge, her notebook filled with cryptic phrases that hinted at more than one mere fiction. Emily's timidity concealed a quiet desperation, her glances toward Victor betraying a connection Poirot could not yet define. And Victor himself, with his easy charm and quick deflections, seemed to dance on the edge of a secret he was not ready to share. By late afternoon, Poirot's explorations led him to the library once more, where he noticed a faint scuff mark on the oak-paneled wall behind a bookshelf. His fingers traced the panel, detecting a subtle give. With a gentle push, the panel swung inward, revealing a narrow passage cloaked in darkness. The air within was cool and musty, carrying the faint scent of earth and decay. Poirot's heart quickened not with fear, but with a thrill of discovery. This passage, he realized, could allow someone to move unseen through the manor, a perfect conduit for secrets. Armed with a small flashlight from his pocket, Poirot ventured into the passage, his steps careful on the uneven stone floor. The walls were damp, the air heavy with the weight of years. The passage wound behind the library, emerging near the servants' quarters and the greenhouse. He stepped into the faint light of the greenhouse. Poirot's eyes caught a glint of something in the soiled, tiny shard of blue glass. It's too small to be the sapphire, but suggestive of something hidden nearby. He pocketed the shard, his mind racing with possibilities as night fell. The manor seemed to close in on itself, the shadows lengthening and the air growing thick with unspoken fears. Poirot returned to the drawing room where the guests had gathered for dinner. The atmosphere was taut, each glance and gesture laden with suspicion. Lady Eleanor, regal as ever, presided over the meal, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as they met Poirot's before dessert was served. A piercing scream shattered the silence. The guests froze, their faces pale in the candlelight. The sound came from the servants' quarters, and Poirot was the first to rise, his small frame moving with surprising speed. He followed the sound to the maid's room, where a young woman named Lily stood trembling, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. "Mr. Poirot," she stammered, her voice shaking, "I found this under my door. I don't know what it means." Poirot took the note, his eyes scanning the scrawled words. "The sapphire hides the sign." The handwriting was jagged, deliberate, as if meant to provoke fear. He folded the note carefully, his mind already piecing together the implications. This was no random theft, he realized. The brooch was a key to a deeper secret, one that someone in the manor was desperate to protect or expose. Turning to the gathered guests who had followed him to the maid's room, Poirot held up the note, his voice calm but commanding. "It, messieurs, this note, it is a clue deliberately placed to guide us or to mislead us. The sapphire, it seems, is more than a jewel. It is a symbol of something hidden within these walls. And Hercule Poirot, he will uncover it." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their faces a gallery of fear, guilt, and defiance. Poirot's eyes lingered on each in turn, noting the colonel's clenched jaw, Clara's sudden stillness, Emily's trembling hands, and Victor's forced smile. The butler, Mr. Grayson, stood at the edge of the group, his expression unreadable, but his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles gleamed white-hot as the guests dispersed. Poirot remained in the servants' quarters, his mind ablaze with questions. The note, the hidden passage, the shard of glass saw were threads in a tapestry that was slowly taking shape. The sapphire's disappearance was no simple theft. It was a catalyst, exposing fractures in the manor's carefully constructed facade. Someone, he knew, was playing a dangerous game, and Poirot was determined to outwit them. By midnight, the manor was silent, save for the distant howl of the wind across the moors. Poirot sat in his room, the note spread before him on the desk, its words illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp. "The sapphire hides the sign." The phrase was melodramatic, almost theatrical, yet it carried a weight that suggested a truth buried deep within the Blackthorne family. Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on the desk, his mind sifting through the day's observations. The colonel's muddy boots, Clara's cryptic notebook, Emily's fear, Victor's evasions. The butler's warning all were pieces of a puzzle that did not yet fit, but Poirot was patient. The truth, he knew, was like a fine wind, required time to reveal its full complexity. And as he gazed out at the moonlit moors, he felt a surge of certainty. The note was no accident. It was a deliberate clue, meant to draw attention to the manor's hidden spaces, the passage behind the library, the greenhouse. The shard of glass hall pointed to a secret that someone had gone to great lengths to conceal. With a final glance at the note, Poirot extinguished the lamp and retired to bed, his mind still turning over the possibilities. Tomorrow, he would explore the hidden passage further, interrogate the guests with renewed focus, and follow the trail of the sapphire to its inevitable conclusion. For now, he allowed himself a small smile, satisfied that the game was well and truly afoot. Chapter 3. The locked room, riddle, the Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly beyond Blackthorne Manor, their misty shroud curling around the Gothic spires of the estate like a living thing. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of peat and heather, and the distant cry of a curlew pierced the silence, lending an eerie weight to the morning. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable mustache twitching slightly as he adjusted his coat against the chill, stood in the grand foyer, his sharp gray eyes scanning the intricate woodwork of the staircase. The events of the previous night, the cryptic note, the missing sapphire brooch, and the uneasy undercurrents among the guests had set his mind ablaze with possibilities. The note, with its ominous declaration, "The sapphire hides the sin," had been no idle jest. It was a beacon, a deliberate flare in the fog of this mystery, and Poirot was determined to follow its light. The manor itself seemed to conspire against clarity. Its corridors twisted like the thoughts of a troubled mind, and its shadows clung to secrets older than the guests themselves. Poirot had spent the early hours of the morning pacing the library, where he discovered the hidden passage behind a bookcase of dusty tomes. The passage, narrow and cloaked in cobwebs, led to a servants' corridor that snaked through the manor's heart, offering unseen access to nearly every room. It was a tantalizing clue, suggesting that someone, perhaps the thief, had moved through the house like a specter. But the note, found by the trembling maid, pointed to something deeper, something tied to the very soul of Blackthorn Manor. As the clock struck 9, Poirot gathered his thoughts and made his way to the dining room, where breakfast was being served. The guests were already seated, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, regal yet strained, presided at the head of the table, her silver hair catching the weak sunlight that filtered through the tall windows. To her right sat Colonel Reginald Hawthorne, his military bearing undermined by a faint tremor in his hands as he gripped his coffee cup. Across from him, Miss Clara Vaughan, the novelist, scribbled furiously in a small notebook, her sharp eyes darting up occasionally to study her companions. Miss Emily Carter, the governess, sat quietly, her delicate features pale and her hands folded tightly in her lap. Victor Blackthorn, Lady Eleanor's nephew, lounged with an air of calculated nonchalance, his charming smile not quite reaching his eyes. The butler, Mr. Grayson, moved silently around the table, pouring tea with a precision that bordered on mechanical. Poirot took his seat, his movements deliberate, and allowed the conversation to unfold naturally. A guest spoke of trivialities, whether the quality of the scones, but the air crackled with unspoken tension. He observed their interactions with the keenness of a hawk, noting the colonel's reluctance to meet Lady Eleanor's gaze, Clara's pointed remarks about trust, and Victor's overly solicitous attention to the governess. Emily, for her part, seemed to shrink under Victor's scrutiny, her fingers twisting a napkin into knots. "Mies, Amos," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. "I trust you all slept well, despite the disturbances of last night." The room fell silent. Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, and she set down her teacup with a faint clink. "Sir Poirot," she said, her tone measured, "we are all eager to assist in resolving this matter. Loss of the sapphire is troubling, but I trust your discretion." "Discretion, madame, is my métier," Poirot replied, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "But it is truth that I seek. In truth, she is a stubborn mistress. Note, found last night, the sapphire hides the sin. It suggests that this is no mere theft. There is a story here, one that perhaps some of you know more of than you care to admit." The colonel coughed, his face reddening. "Preposterous," he muttered, his voice gruff. "Sounds like some melodramatic nonsense. It's probably a prank by one of the staff." "Perhaps," Poirot said smoothly, "but pranks do not leave such carefully crafted clues. The note was written with intent, Colonel. It was meant to be found." Clara Vaughan looked up from her notebook, her pen pausing. "A clue, you say? How thrilling. It's almost as if we're characters in one of my novels. Though I must warn you, Monsieur Poirot, In my stories, the cleverest clues often lead to the darkest secrets. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. And in my experience, mademoiselle, the darkest secrets are often the most illuminating. Victor leaned forward, his voice light but edged with something sharper. Come now, Poirot, you're making us all feel like suspects. Surely you don't think one of us would stoop to stealing Auntie's brooch? Poirot tilted his head, his gaze locking onto Victor's. Monsieur Victor, I suspect everyone until I suspect no one. The heart of man is a labyrinth, and I am but a humble explorer. Emily's voice, soft and trembling, broke the tension. Monsieur Poirot, I don't understand why anyone would write such a note. It's cruel, isn't it, to toy with us like this? Poirot turned to her, his expression softening. Cruel, perhaps, mademoiselle, but also revealing. The note is a mirror, reflecting the fears or guilt of its writer. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual in the manner? Anything that might shed light on this cruelty? Emily hesitated, her eyes flickering toward Victor before dropping to her lap. No, nothing specific. It's just, the manor feels heavy, like it's watching us. Lady Eleanor's voice was sharp. Emily, that's enough. This is an old house, nothing more. Let's not indulge in fanciful notions. But Poirot's interest was piqued. He made a mental note of Emily's unease and Victor's subtle influence over her. The breakfast concluded with strained pleasantries, and Poirot excused himself, his mind already turning to the note's cryptic promise. The sapphire hides the sign. The words echoed in his thoughts as he made his way to the butler's pantry, where Mr. Grayson was polishing silver with meticulous care. Monsieur Grayson, Poirot said, closing the door behind him, you have served this family for many years now. You know its rhythms, its secrets. Tell me, what do you make of this note? The butler's hands paused, his face a mask of neutrality. Psst, I'm sure I don't know, sir. It's not my place to speculate on such matters. But it is your place to observe, Poirot pressed, his voice gentle but firm. The note was found in the servants' corridor, near the library, a place you know well, I think. Grayson's eyes flickered, but he held Poirot's gaze. I know my duties, Monsieur Poirot. Keep the manor running smoothly. If there's mischief afoot, it's not my doing. Perhaps not, Poirot said, but you are a man of loyalty, and loyalty can blind as well as bind. There is a locked room in this manor, an attic, untouched for years. I wish to see it. Will you assist me? Grayson's composure faltered for a fraction of a second. The attic, sir, it's been sealed since the late master's time. No one goes there. Then it is precisely where I must go, Poirot said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Grayson led Poirot through the manor's labyrinthine corridors, up a narrow staircase that creaked under their weight. The air grew colder as they ascended, the walls lined with faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them. At the top, a heavy oak door, its brass lock tarnished with age, barred their way. Grayson produced a ring of keys, his hands trembling slightly as he selected one. The key hasn't been used in years, he muttered, as if to himself. Lady Eleanor forbade it. And yet, Poirot said, forbidden places are often the most revealing. The lock yielded with a groan, and the door swung inward, releasing a gust of musty air. The attic was a cavern of shadows. It slanted, ceiling draped in cobwebs. Dust motes danced in the weak light that spilled through a single grimy window. Old furniture, shrouded in sheets, stood like silent sentinels, and a stack of crates loomed in one corner. Poirot's eyes swept the room, cataloging every detail. The scuffed floorboards, the faint scratches near the window, the faint smell of lavender lingering inexplicably in the air. Mon Dieu, murmured, stepping forward. This is no mere storage room. This is a vault of secrets. Grayson hovered by the door, his unease palpable. "It's just old junk, sir. Nothing of interest." But Poirot was already moving, his gloved hands carefully lifting a sheet to reveal a portrait of a stern-faced man with piercing eyes, Lord Archibald Blackthorne, Lady Eleanor's late husband. The painting was exquisite, its brushstrokes capturing a man of authority and hidden sorrow. Beside it, a smaller frame held a photograph of a young woman, her face strikingly similar to Emily's. Poirot's heart quickened. A clue, perhaps, to the sin the note had promised. In a far corner, half hidden by a crate, Poirot found a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but intact. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the elegant, looping handwriting. The entries were dated decades earlier, written by Lord Archibald himself. I spoke of a marriage strained by ambition, of a sapphire brooch gifted not out of love, but obligation, and of a betrayal that had left a wound unhealed. One passage caught Poirot's attention. The sapphire was her price, but it could not buy her silence. As she threatens to tell all, to ruin us. I have hidden the truth when no one will look in the heart of this house, but I fear it will not stay buried. Poirot closed the journal, his mind racing. The sapphire was more than a jewel. It was a symbol, a key to a scandal that someone in this house was desperate to conceal. He turned to Grayson, who stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Monsieur Grayson," Poirot said softly, "this journal speaks of a woman, a secret. Do you know of whom it speaks?" The butler's jaw tightened. I cannot say, sir. It was before my time." Poirot knew a lie when he saw one. Grayson's loyalty to Lady Eleanor was a fortress, but every fortress had its cracks. He tucked the journal under his arm and gestured for Grayson to lead the way back downstairs. As they descended, Poirot's thoughts turned to the guests. The Colonel's late-night pacing, observed by a maid. Victor's flirtations with Emily, laced with something predatory. Clara's sharp wit, masking a nervous edge. And now, this journal, hinting at a betrayal tied to the sapphire. The pieces were scattered, but Poirot was a master of puzzles, back in the manor's heart. Poirot sought out Emily, finding her in the conservatory, tending to a wilting orchid. Her hands trembled as she worked, and she started when Poirot approached. "Mademoiselle Emily," he said, his voice kind but probing. "You spoke earlier of the manor's heaviness. I wonder if you might share more, perhaps something about a woman from the past." Emily's eyes widened, and she dropped the pruning shears with a clatter. "I don't know what you mean," she stammered. I feel things sometimes, like someone's watching." Poirot nodded, his gaze steady. "And Monsieur Victor?" "He seems to watch you closely, Nan." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away. "He's kind to me, but he asks questions about the family, about things I don't know. I don't like it." Poirot's mind clicked into place. Victor's charm was a tool, wielded with precision to extract information. From whom, and for what purpose? He thanked Emily and left her to her orchids, his thoughts turning to the Colonel. He found the old soldier in the billiard room, racking balls with a force that betrayed his agitation. "Colonel Hawthorne," Poirot said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You are a man of discipline, yet last night you were seen pacing the halls. A restless mind, perhaps." The Colonel's cue struck the table with a sharp crack. "Damn it, man, I couldn't sleep. Storm. The knots, it's all nonsense, but it gets under your skin." "Or perhaps," Poirot said, stepping closer, "it is the weight of memory. The journal I found speaks of a betrayal, Colonel. A military man like yourself might know of such things, Nan." The Colonel's face darkened, but he held Poirot's gaze. "I don't know what you're driving at, Poirot, but I've no part in this. Served with Archie Lord Blackthorne in the war. Good man. Whatever his troubles, they're long buried." But Poirot was not so easily dissuaded. He left the Colonel to his game and returned to the library, where he spread the journal's pages across the table. The entries grew more frantic toward the end, hinting at a confrontation. A woman scorned, a secret locked away. The sapphire, it seemed, was not just a jewel, but a Pandora's box, its loss threatening to unleash chaos. As evening approached, Poirot devised a plan. He gathered the guests in the drawing room, where a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Lady Eleanor sat stiffly, her hands folded in her lap, while the others arranged themselves with varying degrees of unease. Poirot stood before them, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. "Mies Amos," he began, "I have news. The sapphire brooch has been found." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor's eyes widened. Victor's smile faltered, and Emily's hands clutched the armrests of her chair. But it was Clara Vaughan who caught Poirot's attention. Her pen, which had been scratching furiously in her notebook, froze, and her face drained of color. "Where?" Lady Eleanor demanded, her voice trembling with hope. Poirot raised a hand, his expression inscrutable. "It is safe, madame, but its discovery raises questions that some of you may not wish to answer." Clara's laugh was brittle. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you do love your theatrics. If the brooch is found, why all this fuss?" "Because," Mademoiselle Poirot said, his eyes locking onto hers, "the brooch is but the surface of a deeper truth, okay? And someone in this room knows it." The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Clara's composure cracked, her fingers tightening around her pen. Victor shifted in his seat, his charm replaced by a wary edge. The colonel stared into his glass, and Emily's eyes darted to the door, as if longing to flee. Lady Eleanor, alone, remained still, her gaze fixed on Poirot, a silent plea in her eyes. Poirot's trap had been set, and the reactions told him what he needed to know. Clara's flinch was the key a crack in her carefully constructed facade. The novelist, with her sharp mind and sharper tongue, was hiding something. But what, and how did it connect to the sapphire, the journal, and the locked room's secrets? The guests dispersed. Poirot lingered, his mind a whirl of connections. The sapphire was not just a jewel. It was a catalyst, stirring the ghosts of Blackthorn Manor to life. The attic, the journal, the note, they were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and Poirot was determined to unravel it. He retired to his room, the journal tucked under his arm, and as he lit a single candle, he murmured to himself, "The sin is hidden, but not for long. Hercule Poirot will find it, and the truth will shine." The night deepened, and the manor settled into an uneasy silence, broken only by the distant howl of the wind across the moors. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked, and Poirot's eyes narrowed. The game was afoot, and he was ready to play. Chapter 4. The novelist's secret. The morning mist clung to Blackthorn Manor like a shroud, curling around the jagged spires of the Gothic estate and seeping into the crevices of its ancient stone walls. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the grand dining hall, his polished shoes clicking softly against the parquet floor as he surveyed the room. The breakfast table was a battlefield of polite tension, with each guest wielding their cutlery like a weapon of restraint. The retired Colonel, Reginald Hawthorne, stabbed at his kippers with military precision, his mustache twitching as he avoided Poirot's gaze. Across from him, the novelist, Miss Clara Vaughan, sipped her tea with an air of calculated nonchalance, her sharp green eyes darting to the others as if cataloging their every move. The timid governess, Miss Emily Tate, sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, while Victor Blackthorne, Lady Eleanor's charming nephew, flashed a disarming smile that did little to mask the unease in his posture. Lady Eleanor herself presided. At the head of the table, her regal composure betrayed only by the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her cup. Poirot's little gray cells were already at work, piecing together the fragments of the previous night's discoveries. The cryptic note, "The sapphire hides the sin," had been a deliberate clue. He was certain, designed to steer him toward the manor's hidden spaces. The secret passage behind the library had confirmed his suspicions. Someone in this house was moving unseen, orchestrating a game far more intricate than a simple theft. But the novelist flinched at his trap the previous evening, when he'd falsely announced the sapphire's recovery had given him his first solid lead. Clara Vaughan was hiding something, and Poirot intended to uncover it. Bon matin, Mies. Amos, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the clink of porcelain and silver. He adjusted his impeccable mustache and took his seat, his eyes scanning the table. "I trust you all slept well, despite the disturbances of the night." The colonel grunted, his fork pausing midair. "Disturbances? You mean that blasted scream in your theatrics about the brooch, Poirot? Hardly conducive to rest." "Indeed," Clara interjected, her voice smooth as velvet, but with a barbed edge. "One might think you enjoy unsettling your hosts, Monsieur Poirot. Perhaps you should write a novel such flair for drama." Poirot smiled, unperturbed. "A novel, Mademoiselle Vaughan. Nan, I leave the weaving of tales to you, but I am most curious about your latest work. Perhaps it contains inspiration from this very house." Clara's teacup froze halfway to her lips, a flicker of unease crossing her face before she masked it with a laugh. "My novels are fiction, monsieur. Pure imagination. You'd do better to focus on real clues than chasing my stories." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his tone light but his eyes piercing. "But sometimes the fiction reveals the truth, does it not? A writer observes, records, conceals, and sometimes betrays." The table fell silent, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Victor coughed, breaking the tension. "Really, Poirot, must we dissect literature at breakfast? I'd rather discuss the weather. Dreadful fog out there today." "Fog," Poirot mused, "hides many things, Monsieur Blackthorne, but it cannot hide them forever." Lady Eleanor set her cup down with a delicate clink. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you are making progress on the matter of my brooch. These diversions are most unsettling." "Rest assured," Madame Poirot replied, bowing his head slightly. "The truth, it is like the sun. It will burn through the fog in time." After breakfast, Poirot excused himself, his mind fixed on Clara Vaughan. Her reaction last night had been too pronounced, too unguarded for a woman of her composure. He made his way to the library, where the secret passage had first caught his attention. The room was a cavern of knowledge, its towering shelves lined with leather-bound tomes that smelled of dust and time. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows, casting kaleidoscopic patterns across the floor. Poirot approached the bookcase where he discovered the hidden latch, his fingers tracing the worn spine of a volume on Yorkshire folklore. With a soft click, the panel swung open, revealing the narrow, cobweb-laden passage beyond. He lit a small lantern, its flickering glow illuminating the damp stone walls. The passage twisted downward, its air heavy with the scent of earth and secrecy. As he navigated the tight corridor, Poirot's mind churned. The note had been placed deliberately, he was sure, but by whom? Clara's flinch suggested she knew more than she let on, but was she the author of the note, or merely its target? The passage ended at a small, iron-bound door, rusted but sturdy. Poirot tested the handle, but it was locked. He made a mental note to acquire the key, likely from the butler, Mr. Grayson, whose nervous demeanor suggested he knew more of the manor's secrets than he admitted. Returning to the library, Poirot found Clara alone, seated at a writing desk, her pen scratching furiously across a notebook. She looked up, startled, as he entered, quickly closing the book. "Monsieur Poirot, you move like a ghost." "Forgive me, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone polite but firm. "I wished to speak with you privately about the note." Clara's eyes narrowed, but she leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. The note, that melodramatic scribble. "I assumed it was one of Victor's pranks. He's fond of theatrics, you know, Nan," Poirot said, stepping closer. "It was no prank, and I believe you know this. Your reaction last night when I spoke of the sapphire wreath was most telling. You wrote the note, did you not?" Clara's composure cracked, her fingers tightening on the edge of the desk. "You're mistaken, monsieur. I'm a novelist, not a conspirator." "And yet," Poirot continued, his voice soft but relentless, "a novelist crafts stories to conceal as much as to reveal. The note, the sapphire, hides the sin. It is a phrase worthy of your pen. Tell me, Mademoiselle Vaughn, what sin does it hide?" Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You overstep, Poirot. I came here as a guest, not to be interrogated like a common criminal." "Then explain," Poirot said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Explain why you flinched when I spoke of the sapphire. Explain why your hands tremble now. Explain, or I shall assume the worst." For a moment, Clara seemed poised to flee, her gaze darting to the door. Then, with a sigh, she sank back into her chair, her shoulders slumping. "Very well," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wrote the note, but not for the reasons you think." Poirot raised an eyebrow, settling into a chair opposite her. "Proceed, mademoiselle. I am all ears." Clara's story unraveled slowly, like a tapestry pulled thread by thread. She had worked for Lady Eleanor's late husband, Lord Reginald Blackthorne, years ago as a typist and research assistant. He was a brilliant man, she said, her voice tinged with bitterness, but cruel. He had a way of making you feel small, insignificant. I was young, ambitious, and he took advantage of that. Poirot listened intently, his fingers steepled. "And the sapphire?" "It was a gift," Clara said, her eyes distant. "Not to Lady Eleanor, but to me." "A token," he said, "for my loyalty, but I refused it. I left Blackthorne Manor shortly after, determined to make my own way. I became a novelist, built a name for myself. But when Lady Eleanor invited me here, I couldn't resist. I wanted to see if the past could stay buried. And the note." Poirot pressed. Clara hesitated, then reached into her notebook, pulling out a folded newspaper clipping. She slid it across the desk to Poirot. "Okay, this appeared in a local paper a year after I left. It accuses me of stealing jewelry from the Blackthorne estate. It's a lie, but it followed me for years, tainting my reputation. I wrote the note to stir things up, to see who might react. I thought if the real thief was here, they'd betray themselves." Poirot unfolded the clipping, his eyes scanning the faded print. The article was vague, mentioning a young female employee and a valuable item missing from the Blackthorne collection. No charges were filed, but the implication was clear. "You believe someone in this house knows the truth about this theft?" he asked. "I don't know," Clara admitted, her voice cracking, "but I'm tired of carrying the shadow of it. I thought if I could flush out the real culprit, I could clear my name." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Clara's confession was a piece of the puzzle, but it raised more questions than it answered. If she was innocent, who had stolen the sapphire all those years ago? And why had it resurfaced now? He tucked the clipping into his pocket, rising from his chair. "Mercy, Mademoiselle Vaughn. Your candor is appreciated, but I must warn you to not play such games again. They are dangerous." Clara's lips twitched in a wry smile. "I'm a writer, monsieur. Danger is my trade." Leaving the library, Poirot's thoughts turned to the governess, Emily Tate. Her timid demeanor had struck him as a facade, a shield for something deeper. During breakfast, He'd noticed her watching Victor with an intensity that bordered on fear. And then there was Victor himself, charming, reckless, and far too comfortable in his role as the favored nephew. Poirot decided to follow a new lead, the governess's connection to Victor and the greenhouse, where something had clearly been disturbed. The greenhouse stood at the edge of the manor's gardens, its glass panes fogged with condensation. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids, the plants thriving despite the chill of the Yorkshire moors. Poirot moved carefully, his eyes scanning the rows of pots and trellises. The soil near a cluster of ferns was uneven, as if recently disturbed. Kneeling, he brushed away the dirt, his fingers grazing a small metal latch buried beneath the earth. With a gentle tug, he revealed a hidden compartment, no larger than a cigar box. It was empty, but the edges were clean, suggesting recent use. Monsieur Poirot. A soft voice called from the doorway. Poirot turned to see Miss Emily, her hands clasped nervously. "What are you doing here?" "Investigating," Mademoiselle Poirot said, rising and dusting off his hands. "And you? 'Tis unusual for a governess to wander the greenhouse at such an hour." Emily's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. I needed air. The manor feels so stifling today." "Deed," Poirot said, stepping closer. "And yet, I suspect you were here for another reason. Perhaps to check on something, or someone." Emily's eyes widened, but before she could respond, a shadow moved outside the greenhouse. Poirot's head snapped toward the glass, catching a glimpse of Victor slipping through the garden gate. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, his voice low, "what does Monsieur Victor hide in this greenhouse?" Emily hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "He's been acting strangely, monsieur. Last night, I saw him out here, digging. He didn't know. I was watching. He's desperate for money. I think he's hiding something, maybe the sapphire." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And why do you watch him so closely, mademoiselle? What is your stake in this?" Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she turned and fled, her footsteps echoing on the stone path. Poirot let her go, his mind already piecing together the next move. The greenhouse compartment, Clara's confession, Victor's nocturnal activities, it was all connected, but the shape of the puzzle remained elusive. As evening fell, Poirot returned to the manor, his thoughts interrupted by a commotion in the drawing room. Lady Eleanor stood by the fireplace, her face pale, clutching a letter. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "this was left on my desk. It's about the sapphire." Poirot took the letter, his eyes scanning the elegant handwriting. "The truth is closer than you think. Look to the shadows." It was unsigned, but the paper matched the note from the previous night. Another clue, another layer. Poirot glanced at the gathered guest Clara, avoiding his gaze. Victor, fidgeting with his cufflinks. The Colonel, staring into his brandy. Emily, pale and silent. "Mies, Amos," Poirot said, folding the letter. "It seems the game continues. But rest assured, Hercule Poirot will find the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried." The night stretched on, filled with whispers and shadows. Poirot sat in his room, the newspaper clipping and the new letters spread before him. The sapphire was more than a jewelette, was a key to a scandal, a secret that someone in Blackthorn Manor was desperate to keep hidden. And as the clock struck midnight, Poirot made a silent vow. He would uncover that secret, even if it meant unraveling the very heart of the manor itself. Chapter 5. The Colonel's Confession. The wind howled across the Yorkshire moors, rattling the ancient windows of Blackthorn Manor, as if the spirits of the estate's troubled past were clawing to be let in. Hercule Poirot stood by the tall, arched window in the library, his silhouette sharp against the flickering glow of a candelabrum. Storm outside was gathering strength, mirroring the tempest brewing within the manor's walls. The sapphire, brooch remained missing, its absence a silent accusation that hung over every guest. Poirot's gray cells were alight, piecing together the fragments of alibis glances and half-truths he had collected over the past 2 days. The cryptic note, the sapphire hides the sin, had set his mind ablaze. And now, as the clock struck 10, he was ready to tighten the screws on one particular suspect, Colonel Reginald Hawthorne. The library was a cavern of shadows. Towering bookshelves lined with leather-bound tomes that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. Poirot adjusted his perfectly knotted tie and turned to face the room, where the colonel sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, his weathered hands gripping the armrests. The man's military bearing was impeccable, even in the dim light, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Poirot had seen such flickers before, teeny cracks in the facade of a man accustomed to command. "Colonel Hawthorne," Poirot began, his voice soft but deliberate, "you have been most forthcoming about your evening walk on the night the sapphire vanished. Yet, I find myself puzzled. You claim to have walked the East Garden path, alone, for precisely 30 minutes. A man of your discipline, I am sure, keeps time with the precision of a metronome. Yet, the groundskeeper, Mr. Tuttle, insists he saw no one in the East Garden that evening. Curious, Nan?" Colonel's jaw tightened, his mustache twitching slightly. "Tuttle's an old fool, half blind in the dark. I was there, Poirot. I walked the path, as I said." Poirot tilted his head, his eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. "Perhaps, but the East Garden path, it is visible from the upper windows of the manor, is it not? And Miss Emily, the governess, she was at her window that evening, preparing for her duties. She, too, saw no one." "2 witnesses, Colonel, and neither corroborates your story. This, I find, is most inconvenient for you." The colonel shifted, his fingers drumming once on the armrest before stilling. "What are you implying, Poirot? That I'm lying? Okay, I've served king and country for 30 years. My word is my bond. Okay." "Yet," Poirot said, pacing slowly, his polished shoes clicking on the hardwood floor, "the word of a man, even one so decorated, can bend under the weight of a secret. You spoke of a secret, Colonel, one that Lady Eleanor's late husband helped you bury. A wartime disgrace, perhaps. Something that might compel a man to act against his honor." The colonel's face darkened, a storm cloud passing over his features. He rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You go too far, sir. I won't sit here and be accused like some common thief." "Sit," Colonel Poirot said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We are not finished. I ask you only to explain. Kay's sapphire is missing. A note speaks of sin, and your alibi, it crumbles like dry leaves. Kay, if you are not the thief, then help me understand why your story does not hold." The colonel sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumping slightly, as if the weight of Poirot's words had pressed the air from his lungs. For a long moment he stared into the fire, the crackling logs casting shadows across his lined face. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and rough. "You're a devil of a man, Poirot. You see too much." "I see only what is there to be seen," Poirot replied, taking a seat opposite the colonel. "Now, tell me of this disgrace. What did Lord Blackthorne do for you that binds you to this family, even now?" The colonel's eyes met Poirot's, and for the first time, the steel in them wavered. "It was a long time ago. The war, it changes a man. I was young, ambitious, but reckless. There was an incident, a failed operation under my command. Men died, good men, and the blame fell on me. It should have ended my career, my life, but Lord Blackthorne, he was a friend, a mentor, used his influence to bury the report too, save my name. I owed him everything." Poirot leaned forward, his hands clasped over his cane. "And this debt, It extends to the sapphire, a symbol of your loyalty, perhaps. The colonel shook his head, his voice hoarse. I don't know about the sapphire. I swear it. I'd never betray Eleanor. She's all that's left of him. But I've kept my silence, as he asked. The scandal, it wasn't just about me, okay? There were others involved, powerful men. Exposing it would have ruined more than just me. Poirot's mustache twitched as he considered this, and yet someone knows. The note, Colonel. The sapphire hides the sin. It points to the past, 2 secrets you guard. Who else knows of this disgrace? The colonel's gaze dropped to his hands. I don't know. I've spent years wondering if the truth would come out. When Eleanor told me about the sapphire, I thought, perhaps someone from back then, out. I don't know who. Poirot rose, his mind racing. The colonel's confession was a crack in the manor's carefully constructed facade, but it was not the whole picture. The sapphire, the note, the hidden passage all pointed to a conspiracy, deeper than a simple theft. As he turned toward the door, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Miss Emily? The governess stood in the doorway, her pale face framed by the dark wood. Monsieur Poirot, I'm sorry to disturb you, but I must speak with you. It's urgent. Colonel stood, his composure returning like a well-worn uniform. I'll leave you to it, Poirot, but know this, I'm no thief. My honor is all I have left. Poirot nodded, watching the colonel stride out, his back ramrod straight. Then he turned to Emily, whose hands were clasped tightly before her. Mademoiselle, what is so urgent that you seek me out at this hour? Her eyes darted to the hallway, then back to Poirot. It's Victor. I saw him slip a letter into his pocket this evening during dinner. He thought no one noticed, but I did. It was addressed to someone outside the manor, and it looked suspicious. I don't know what to make of it, but I thought you should know. Poirot's interest sharpened. A letter, you say? And where's Monsieur Victor now? In the drawing room with Lady Eleanor and the others. Okay, but he's been acting strangely, all restless, secretive. I don't trust him. Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Mercy, mademoiselle. You have done well to tell me. Now, go to bed and leave this matter to Poirot. As Emily hurried away, Poirot's mind churned. A letter, a secret, and Victor's erratic behavior pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. But the picture remained maddeningly incomplete. He made his way to the drawing room where the guests were gathered, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of oil lamps. Lady Eleanor sat by the fire, her expression serene but strained. Clara Vaughan, the novelist, was scribbling in a notebook, her sharp eyes darting up occasionally. Victor lounged in a corner, a glass of brandy in hand. His charming smile, a touch too forced. Poirot's entrance drew every eye. Mesdames, messieurs, he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. I have a small matter to discuss. It seems there are secrets within secrets in this house. A letter, perhaps, sent to an unknown party. A letter that may hold the key to our mystery. Victor's glass froze halfway to his lips. What's that supposed to mean, Poirot? Poirot's eyes locked onto Victor's. It means, monsieur, that I know of your letter, and I intend to find out to whom it was sent and why. The room fell silent, the crackling fire the only sound. Victor set his glass down with a clink, his smile vanishing. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. I've sent no letters. Perhaps, Poirot said, stepping closer. Okay, but I will know the truth before this night is through. If you are wise, monsieur, you will not stand in my way. The tension in the room was palpable as Poirot turned and left, his mind already planning his next move. He needed that letter, and he needed it now. The storm raged on, its fury shaking the manor's ancient stones as Poirot made his way to Victor's quarters. The young man's room was on the second floor, a spacious chamber filled with the trappings of privileged silk curtains, a mahogany desk, a four-poster bed, draped in velvet. Poirot moved swiftly, his gloved hands searching with the precision of a surgeon. The desk drawers yielded nothing but old receipts and a half-empty bottle of ink. The wardrobe held only clothes, impeccably tailored, but unremarkable. Under the bed, however, Poirot's fingers brushed against something, a small, locked box. With a deft twist of a hairpin, Poirot opened it, revealing a stack of letters tied with a ribbon. Most were mundane correspondence with tailors and creditors, but one stood out, its envelope unmarked, save for a single initial, L. Poirot slipped it into his pocket, his heart quickening. This was no ordinary letter. The paper was heavy, the handwriting hurried but precise, as if written under duress. Before he could read it, the door creaked open. Victor stood there, his face pale, his eyes wide with shock. What the devil are you doing, Poirot? Poirot rose, the letter concealed in his hand. Mud, monsieur. You have secrets, and I am uncovering them. Victor's hand twitched toward his pocket, and Poirot's instincts flared. Do not be foolish, monsieur, he said sharply. Ever you are hiding, it is better to confess now than to face the consequences later. Victor hesitated, then slumped against the doorframe, his bravado crumbling. If you don't understand, Poirot, it's not what you think. Then explain, Poirot said, his voice like steel. What is this letter? And who is L? Victor ran a hand through his hair, his charm replaced by desperation. It's personal. A debt I owe. I didn't steal the sapphire, I swear, but I needed money, and someone offered to help in exchange for information. Information. Poirot's eyes narrowed. About the sapphire. Victor shook his head. About the family. Things I shouldn't know, but I do. I had no choice, Poirot. I'm in deep with the wrong people. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low. And this L, who is he, or she? Victor's mouth opened, but before he could answer, a sharp cry echoed from downstairs. Poirot spun toward the sound, his senses alert. Stay here, he ordered Victor, who nodded weakly, racing down the grand staircase. Poirot followed the prod sound to the butler's pantry, where Mr. Grayson stood over a shattered glass, his face ashen. Monsieur Poirot, he gasped, the silver dagger is gone. The one from the drawing-room display. I swear it was here this morning. Poirot's mind raced. The sapphire, the note, the letter, and now a missing dagger. Each piece pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan. When did you last see it, Monsieur Grayson? This morning, when I polished the collection. It was there, I'm certain. Poirot's eyes swept the room, landing on a small, open window. The storm's wind whistled through it, carrying the scent of wet earth. Someone has been busy, he murmured, and they are still among us. The night grew darker, the storm's ferocity unrelenting, as Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing-room once more. Lady Eleanor stood by the mantel, her regal poise unshaken despite the growing unease. Clara Vaughan's pen had stilled, her eyes sharp with curiosity. Emily hovered near the door, her face pale, while Victor slouched in his chair, his earlier confidence gone. The colonel stood by the window, staring into the storm as if it held answers. Madame et messieurs, Poirot began, holding up the letter from Victor's room. A new piece of the puzzle has come to light. A letter addressed to one L, sent by Monsieur Victor. It speaks of a debt of secret sold. And now a silver dagger has vanished, a weapon that could turn this mystery deadly. I ask you all, who is L, and what did they know of the sapphire? The room erupted in murmurs. Lady Eleanor's hand tightened on her cane. Victor, is this true? She demanded, her voice trembling with betrayal. Victor stood, his face flushed. It's not what it seems, Aunt Eleanor. I didn't steal the sapphire. I was trying to protect you. Protect me, she snapped. By selling my secrets. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Enough. The letter. It mentions a meeting at dawn. Whoever L is, they are close, perhaps even within this manor, and the dagger's absence suggests they mean to act soon. Clara Vaughan leaned forward, her voice cutting. Saying we're in danger, Poirot, that one of us is a thief and a potential murderer. I am saying, Poirot replied, that the truth is near. And I will not rest until it is revealed. As the guests exchanged uneasy glances, Poirot slipped the letter into his pocket, his mind already planning the trap. A dawn was hours away, but he would be ready. The sapphire, the dagger, the note-all were threads in a web of deceit, and Poirot was determined to unravel it before the storm broke. The hours before dawn were a battle against time. Poirot sat in his room, the letter spread before him on a small desk. The coded message was simple, but Damiga promised to deliver the truth about the sapphire in exchange for a sum of money. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the intent, it was clear. Someone was using Victor to expose a secret that could destroy Lady Eleanor. But who? A soft knock broke his reverie. Emily entered, her eyes wide with fear. Monsieur Poirot, I couldn't sleep. I heard something outside, near the greenhouse. Footsteps, in the storm. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his cane in hand. Show me, mademoiselle. They braved the storm, Emily leading him. To the greenhouse, where the glass panes shuddered under the wind's assault. In the dim light of a lantern, Poirot saw its fresh footprints in the mud, leading to a side door. Someone had been here recently, despite the storm. He pushed open the door, revealing a small, empty compartment hidden beneath a workbench. It was just as he had suspected, a hiding place, but for what? The sapphire, the dagger. As they returned to the manor, soaked and shivering, Poirot's mind raced. The footprints were too large to be Victor's, too deliberate to be careless. Someone else was moving in the shadows, someone who knew the manor's secrets. At dawn, Poirot gathered the guests in the hall, the storm now a low rumble in the distance. He held the letter aloft, his voice steady. The time for secrets is over. This letter, sent by Monsieur Victor, was meant for L, a person who seeks to expose Lady Eleanor's past. Lee, and the silver dagger, stolen last night, suggest a threat. I have set a trap, and the culprit will be revealed. Victor's face was a mask of dread. Poirot, I swear, I did in silence. Poirot snapped. Baptista, you will all remain here until I return. He slipped out into the fading storm, following the footprints to a small gatehouse at the edge of the estate. There, in the gray light of dawn, he found what he sought, a cloaked figure, clutching a bundle. As Poirot approached, the figure turned, revealing a woman's face, unfamiliar, yet sharp with malice. Mrs. Langley, Poirot said, recognizing her from a description in the butler's ledger. You are L, are you not? The woman's eyes narrowed, but she did not deny it. You're too late, Poirot. Okay, the sapphire is mine, and the truth will out. Poirot stepped closer, his cane tapping the ground. The sapphire is not yours, madame. And the truth, it is mine to reveal. Before she could flee, the colonel appeared, his face grim. I knew it was you, Margaret. You've been after Eleanor's ruin for years. Double quotes, Mrs. Langley sneered. She stole everything from me, my inheritance, my future, the sapphires. Scandal will destroy her. Poirot shook his head. Not today, madame. The dagger, where is it? Her hand twitched toward her cloak, but the colonel was faster, seizing her wrist. The dagger fell to the ground, glinting in the dawn light. Back at the manor, Poirot presented the dagger and the letter to Lady Eleanor. Listened in stunned silence as he recounted Mrs. Langley's plot. Victor, pale and repentant, admitted to his role, driven by debt and desperation. The sapphire, he confessed, was hidden in Emily's room. Misguided attempt to protect his aunt. Lady Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Why, Victor? Why betray me? I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I thought I could fix it." Poirot turned to the group, his voice solemn. "The sapphire is safe, the dagger recovered, and Mrs. Langley will face justice. But the sin, it remains hidden. For now, I choose to protect this family. Let it stay that way." As the guests dispersed, Poirot caught Emily's grateful glance. The colonel clapped his shoulder, his honor intact. Kay and Victor, humbled, vowed to make amends. Chapter 6. The Governess's Tale. Storm rolled in with a ferocity that seemed to mirror the tensions within Blackthorn Manor. Rain lashed against the tall, arched windows, each gust rattling the ancient panes as though the Moors themselves were demanding entry. Hercule Poirot stood by the fireplace in the grand drawing-room, his small, precise hands clasped behind his back, his mustache impeccably trimmed despite the late hour. The flickering flames cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the faces of the gathered guests, each one a study in guarded unease. The air was thick with suspicion, the kind that clung like damp wool, and Poirot's sharp eyes darted from one to another, cataloging every twitch, every sidelong glance. Dinner had been a strained affair, the clink of silverware and the occasional cough punctuating long stretches of silence. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, seated at the head of the table, had maintained her regal composure, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier's light, but her fingers had trembled slightly as she lifted her wineglass. The retired Colonel Hargrove, his face a map of weathered lines, had pushed his food around his plate, his usual bluster subdued. Ms. Clara Vaughan, the novelist, had attempted to fill the silence with witty remarks, but her voice had carried a brittle edge, as though she were reciting lines from one of her own melodramatic tales. Victor Blackthorn, Lady Eleanor's charming but increasingly erratic nephew, had been uncharacteristically quiet, his eyes darting toward the governess, Miss Emily, who sat pale and silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The butler, Mr. Grayson, had moved about the room with his usual efficiency. Poirot had noted the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, detail that did not escape the detective's meticulous observation. Poirot had orchestrated the dinner with a purpose, subtly probing each guest with questions designed to unsettle, to reveal. Had spoken of the sapphire brooch's importance to the family, dropping hints about its possible whereabouts, watching for reactions. Victor's fingers had tightened around his fork. Clara's smile had faltered, and Emily's gaze had dropped to her untouched plate. The Colonel had cleared his throat loudly, as though to drown out the implications of Poirot's words. Now, as the guests lingered over coffee, the storm outside grew louder, and Poirot sensed the moment was ripe for a breakthrough. "Mies, Amos," Poirot began, his voice soft but commanding, cutting through the low hum of the storm. All eyes turned to him, some wary, others curious. The disappearance of the sapphire brooch is no simple theft. It is a thread in a tapestry of secrets, one that I, Hercule Poirot, intend to unravel. But to do so, I require honesty. Secrets, they are like shadows. They grow longer when the light of truth is dim. Lady Eleanor's lips parted as if to speak, but she hesitated, her eyes flickering toward Emily. The governess, barely 20, with her delicate features and auburn hair pinned tightly at the nape of her neck, seemed to shrink under the weight of the room's attention. Poirot noted this, his mind already weaving connections. He had intercepted a coded letter from Emily to Victor earlier that day. Its cryptic contents: "Meet me at dawn. The truth cannot wait," suggesting a conspiracy or a confession. The letter had been written in a trembling hand, the ink smudged as though tears had fallen upon it. And then there was the matter of the missing silver dagger, reported by Mr. Grayson just before dinner. The theft of such a specific item, so soon after the sapphire's disappearance, could not be coincidence. Poirot's little gray cells hummed with possibilities as the coffee cups were cleared. Victor rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "If you'll excuse me, Aunt Eleanor, I'm feeling rather tired," he said, his voice too smooth, his smile too practiced. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Victor's sudden departure was no surprise. The young man had been restless all evening, his charm a thin veneer over something darker. Poirot excused himself moments later, citing a need to review his notes, but instead slipped into the shadowed corridor, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet. The manor was a labyrinth of secrets, its dark wood paneling and heavy drapes absorbing sound and light alike. Poirot moved swiftly, following the faint sound of Victor's footsteps. The young man's path led not to his own room, but to the servants' quarters, a narrow hallway lined with plain doors. Poirot paused, his ear pressed to the wall, as Victor's shadow disappeared into Mr. Grayson's small utilitarian room. The detective's heart quickened. This was no casual visit. Victor was searching for something or someone. Poirot waited, his breath measured, until he heard the soft creak of a floorboard. He stepped forward, pushing the door open just as Victor rifled through a drawer, his hands trembling. The young man froze, his dark eyes wide with panic. "Monsieur Victor," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild. "It is curious, is it not, that you find yourself in the butler's quarters at such an hour? Perhaps you are looking for something, or perhaps you are hiding something." Victor straightened, his jaw tightening. I was merely checking on Mr. Grayson. He seemed unwell at dinner." Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "A noble concern, but I think not. The truth, Monsieur Victor, is a far better companion than a lie. What do you seek here?" Victor's gaze darted to the door, then back to Poirot. For a moment, it seemed he might bolt, but the detective's steady presence held him in place. "I don't know what you're talking about," Victor muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "The letter, monsieur, is the one you received from Miss Emily. It speaks of a meeting at dawn, of a truth that cannot wait. And now a silver dagger is missing, and you are searching the butler's room. These are not the actions of an innocent man." Victor's face paled, and he sank onto the edge of the butler's narrow bed, his hands clasped tightly. "You don't understand, Poirot. It's not what you think, Emily. She's in trouble. She's being blackmailed." Poirot's eyebrows rose, though he kept his expression neutral. "Blackmailed? By whom, and for what purpose?" Victor hesitated, his eyes flickering with fear. "I can't say. Not yet. But it's about the sapphire and a tease and something else. Something about Aunt Eleanor's past. Emily knows things that could ruin everything." Poirot's mind raced. The governess, so quiet and unassuming, held a key to the mystery. He recalled her pale face at dinner, the way her hands had trembled as she passed the letter to Victor. There was a story here, one that went beyond a stolen brooch. "Very well," Poirot said, his voice firm. "You will tell me nothing more. But I will speak with Miss Emily, and you, Monsieur Victor, will stay where I can see you." Leaving Victor under the watchful eye of the butler, who had been summoned by a quick note, Poirot made his way to the governess's room. The storm outside had intensified, thunder rolling across the moors like the drums of an approaching army. He knocked softly on Emily's door, and after a moment, it opened to reveal the young woman, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair slightly disheveled. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. I didn't expect you. May I enter, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but insistent. She nodded, stepping aside to let him into the small, sparsely furnished room. A single candle burned on the bedside table, casting a warm but feeble light. Poirot noted the open book on her desk, a volume of poetry, its pages worn from frequent reading, and a small, locked diary beside it. Emily sat on the edge of her bed, her hands twisting in her lap. "You've spoken to Victor," she said. "Not a question, but a statement." "Oui," Poirot replied, taking a seat in the room's only chair. "He tells me you are being blackmailed." "I would hear your story, mademoiselle, in your own words." "The truth. It is the only way to untangle this web." Emily's breath hitched, and for a moment Poirot thought she might refuse. But then, as though a dam had broken, she began to speak, her voice low and tremulous. "I'm not who I seem to be, Monsieur Poirot. I'm Lady Eleanor's daughter." Poirot's expression remained impassive, though inwardly his mind snapped to attention. This was the scandal hinted at in the journal, the betrayal tied to the sapphire. "Continue, mademoiselle," he urged. Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she pressed on. "My mother, Lady Eleanor, was young when she met my father. He wasn't her husband, Lord Blackthorne. He was someone else, a man she loved before her marriage. When I was born, she couldn't keep me, not openly. It would have destroyed her reputation, her family. So I was raised by a distant cousin, far from here, and when I was old enough, I came back as the governess. Only Mr. Grayson and my mother know the truth." "And Victor?" Poirot asked, his voice sharp. Emily's lips trembled. "Victor found out. I don't know how. Perhaps he overheard something, or found a letter. He's been using it against me, demanding I tell him where the sapphire is. He says he needs the money, that he's in debt to dangerous people. He thinks the sapphire's hidden somewhere in the manor, and he's convinced I know where." Poirot leaned forward, his eyes piercing. "And do you know, mademoiselle?" She shook her head vehemently. "I swear, I don't. My mother never told me, but Victor won't. Believe me, he's desperate, and he's changed. He's not the man I thought he was." Poirot studied her, noting the sincerity in her voice, the fear in her eyes. But there was something else, a flicker of hesitation that suggested she was holding back. "The letter, mademoiselle, the one you gave to Victor. What was its purpose?" Emily's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. "I wanted to confront him, to beg him to stop. I wrote that we should meet at dawn, away from the manor, so I could convince him to leave me alone. Now I'm afraid. The dagger's gone, and I think he might do something terrible." Poirot's mind whirred. It's the missing dagger, the coded letter, Victor's search of the butler's roomette, all pointed to a deeper conspiracy. But Emily's revelation about her parentage was the key. The sapphire, it seemed, was not just a valuable heirloom, but a symbol of a hidden truth, one that could destroy the Blackthorne family if exposed. And yet, Poirot sensed there was more to Emily's story, a piece of the puzzle still missing. He rose, his movements precise. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful, but I must ask you to remain in your room tonight. The storm, it is dangerous, and so, perhaps, are others in this house." Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. As Poirot left her room, he heard the lock click behind him, a small act of self-preservation in a house full of secrets. The storm showed no signs of abating as Poirot made his way to Lady Eleanor's study, a room he had not yet fully explored. The study was a sanctuary of dark wood and leather-bound books, its walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced Blackthorne ancestors. A large oak desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers and a single, ornate inkstand. Poirot's eyes were drawn to a painting above the fireplace, a portrait of a young Lady Eleanor, her beauty radiant, her eyes holding a secret sorrow. Beside her, almost hidden in the shadows of the frame, was a small, locked safe. Poirot approached the safe, his fingers tracing its edges. It was old, but sturdy, its lock intricate. He had no key, but his mind was already working through possibilities. The sapphire, he suspected, had once been here, but the empty compartment in the greenhouse suggested it had been moved. By whom and why? Victor's desperation, Emily's fear, the butler's loyalty, all were threads in the same tapestry. But the pattern remained elusive as he examined the safe. A faint noise caught his attention, a soft click, like the closing of a door. He turned, his senses alert, and moved silently toward the sound. The corridor outside the study was dark, the storm's roar masking any footsteps, but Poirot's instincts told him he was not alone. He waited, his back pressed against the wall, until a shadow moved past, swift and purposeful. It was Victor. His coat damped from the rain, his face set in a grim line. Poirot followed at a distance, his steps careful, as Victor made his way to the greenhouse. The glass structure loomed in the darkness, its panes rattling under the storm's assault. Poirot slipped inside, just as Victor knelt by the same compartment. Poirot had discovered earlier, his hands fumbling with the latch. "Monsieur Victor," Poirot said, stepping into the dim light of a single lantern. "You are persistent, Nan." Victor spun around, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Poirot, I was just enough," Poirot interrupted, his voice cutting through the wind. "You search for the sapphire, but you will not find it here. The compartment is empty. As you well know, tell me, monsieur, who is it that you fear, that drives you to such reckless actions?" Victor's shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked less like a scheming nephew and more like a frightened boy. "It's not just the money," he whispered. "There's someone else, someone who knows about Emily, about the sapphire, about everything. Okay? They're threatening to tell the world unless I deliver the brooch." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Someone? Who are they?" Victor shook his head, his voice barely audible. "I don't know her name. She came to me at the end, out on the moors. She said she's a relative, someone with a claim to the Blackthorn estate. She knows things, Poirot. Things that could ruin us all." Poirot's mind raced. Mysterious woman, a stranger with knowledge of the family's secrets. This was a new piece of the puzzle, one that shifted the entire picture. "Return to the house, monsieur," he said, his tone firm, "and speak of this to no one. I, Hercule Poirot, will find this woman, and I will uncover the truth." As Victor retreated, Poirot stood alone in the greenhouse, the storm's fury a fitting backdrop to his thoughts. The sapphire, Emily's parentage, the missing dagger, and now a stranger in the morsette was a mystery worthy of his skills, but it was also a test of his moral compass. To reveal the truth might protect the innocent, but it could also destroy them. For now, he would follow the trail to this mysterious woman, and he would not rest until every secret was laid bare. The night stretched on, the storm unrelenting, as Poirot returned to the manor, his mind a whirlwind of deduction. The governess's tale had opened a door, but beyond it lay a labyrinth of motives and betrayals. And somewhere in the shadows of Blackthorn Manor, the sapphire waited, its blue heart pulsing with the weight of a family's sins. Chapter 7. The butler's burden. The morning mist clung to Blackthorn Manor like a shroud, its tendrils curling around the Gothic spires, as if reluctant to let the dawn break. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the grand staircase, his polished shoes gleaming against the worn oak, his mustache meticulously twirled. The manor's air was thick with secrets, and the previous night's revelations had only deepened the enigma. The sapphire brooch remained missing, the silver daggers. Theft had added a new layer of intrigue, and Poirot's little gray cells were humming with possibilities. The butler, Mr. Grayson, had become a focal point in his investigation, his stoic demeanor betraying a quiet burden that Poirot was determined to uncover. The dining hall was unusually silent as Poirot entered. The long mahogany table, set for breakfast, but devoid of its usual chatter. Lady Eleanor sat at the head, her face pale but composed, her fingers tracing the rim of a porcelain teacup. Victor, her charming but increasingly erratic nephew, slouched in his chair, his eyes darting toward the door as if expecting an escape. The novelist, Ms. Clara Vaughan, scribbled furiously in a small notebook, her sharp features taut with concentration. The governess, Miss Emily, sat with her hands folded tightly, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth, while the colonel, rigid as ever, sipped his coffee with military precision. The absence of the butler was conspicuous, his usual impeccable service replaced by a young footman who fumbled with the silverware. Bon matin, Mies, Amos Poirot greeted, his voice cutting through the tension like a whelmed dart. I trust you have all slept well, despite the disturbances of the night. Lady Eleanor offered a faint smile. Mr. Poirot, your presence is a comfort, though I fear this house grows heavier with each passing day. Victor snorted, leaning back in his chair. Hey, it's a tomb, Aunt Eleanor. K. And now, with daggers vanishing, I'd say we're all one step from a Gothic novel. Clara's pen paused, her eyes narrowing at Victor. Careful, Mr. Blackthorne. You're giving me ideas for my next book. Poirot raised a hand, his smile polite but firm. Let us not leap to the melodrama. S'il vous plaît. The disappearance of the silver dagger is a matter most curious, but it is merely one thread in the tapestry of this mystery. I wish to speak with Mr. Grayson. Where might I find him? The footman, a lanky youth named Thomas, hesitated before answering. He's in the east wing, sir. Said he needed to check the linens. Linens? At such an hour? Eyebrows arched, tress interesant. I shall seek him out. Enjoy your breakfast, Mies Amos. The east wing was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and shadowed alcoves, its walls adorned with faded tapestries depicting Blackthorn ancestors. Poirot's footsteps echoed softly as he navigated the passages, his mind sifting through the clues. The sapphire brooch, the cryptic note, the hidden passage, the journal's hint of scandal, and now the stolen dagger. Each guest had a motive, a secret, but Grayson's role as the manor's silent guardian intrigued him most. The butler's loyalty to Lady Eleanor was unshakable, yet his reticence suggested a deeper truth. He found Grayson in a small storeroom, surrounded by neatly folded linens and silver polish. The butler's hands were steady as he polished a candelabra, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease when he saw Poirot. Mr. Grayson, Poirot began, closing the door behind him. You are, I think, a man who sees much and says little. This is a quality I admire, but today I must ask you to speak. Grayson set the candelabra down with deliberate care. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. My duties keep me occupied. Your duties, Poirot said, stepping closer. It's to Lady Eleanor, to this house, and perhaps 2 secrets that way, heavier than any silver. The sapphire brooch, the Daggersea's objets are not mere trifles. They are keys to a truth you guard. Tell me, why do you protect it so fiercely? Grayson's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the candelabra. I've served this family for 30 years, Mr. Poirot. Loyalty is not a choice, it's a vow. C'est magnifique. This loyalty, Poirot replied, his tone gentle but probing. But loyalty can blind Nan. I have learned that the sapphire was no ordinary gift. It came not from Lord Blackthorne, but from another lover, perhaps. This is a scandal that could ruin Lady Eleanor, and you, I think, no more than you admit. The butler's hand stilled, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of decades pressed upon them. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the distant creak of the manor's ancient beams. Then Grayson spoke, his voice low and measured. You're a clever man, Mr. Poirot. Too clever, perhaps. Yes, I know of the sapphire's origins. It was a gift from Sir Reginald Marlowe, a man who loved Lady Eleanor before her marriage. She was young, caught in a world of duty and expectation. The brooch was a token of a love she could not keep. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And you, Mr. Grayson, have kept this secret all these years. Why? Grayson met his gaze, his expression resolute. Because Lady Eleanor is this house, sir. Her strength, her dignity, they hold Blackthorn together. The truth came out. It wouldn't just shame her. It would destroy Miss Emily, her daughter, who knows nothing of this. Poirot nodded slowly, his mind racing. Bean. But the brooch is gone, and now the dagger. These thefts are not random. Someone seeks to expose this secretor to profit from it. Tell me, have you seen anything unusual? Stranger, perhaps, or a guest behaving out of character? Grayson hesitated, then reached into his pocket, producing a small, worn ledger. This may help you, sir. I've kept records of certain transactions, payments made to an unknown party, small sums over the years. I thought they were for household expenses, but recently they've increased. I found this in the library, hidden behind a false panel. Poirot took the ledger, his fingers tracing the leather cover. Magnifique. This is a thread I shall follow. But tell me, Mr. Grayson, why hide this until now? I hoped it wasn't connected, Grayson admitted. I wanted to protect the family, not expose them further. Poirot tucked the ledger into his coat. Your loyalty is admirable, but the truth, it must be faced. I shall return, Mr. Grayson. Do not speak of this to anyone. Leaving the storeroom, Poirot's mind buzzed with new connections. The ledger suggested an outsider's involvement, someone exploiting the manor's secrets for gain. But who? Victor's debts made him a likely pawn, but his denial of stealing the sapphire rang true. Clara's past and the planted dagger pointed to manipulation, while Emily's vulnerability as Lady Eleanor's secret daughter added a layer of emotional complexity. The colonel's wartime disgrace and the governess's coded letter lingered in Poirot's thoughts. But the ledger was a tangible clue, one he could not ignore. The manor's library was his next destination, a cavernous room lined with bookshelves that stretched to the vaulted ceiling. The hidden passage he'd discovered earlier loomed in his mind, its entrance concealed behind a portrait of Lord Blackthorn. Poirot examined the false panel Grayson had mentioned, finding it cleverly disguised as a decorative molding. Inside was a narrow compartment, empty but for a faint scent of tobacco and a single, crumpled photograph. He smoothed the photograph, revealing a younger Victor standing beside an unknown woman, her face partially obscured by a hat. The background showed a bustling city street, not the moors of Yorkshire. Poirot's lips twitched. Interesting. Who is this femme Mistar, and what does she mean to you? Victor. Slipping the photograph into his pocket, Poirot returned to the main hall, where he found Victor pacing near the grand fireplace. Young man's charm had frayed, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Monsieur Victor. Poirot called, his tone light but commanding. A word, if you please. Victor stopped, his hands shoved into his pockets. What now, Poirot? I told you everything I know. P8, tout, F8, Poirot said, producing the photograph. This was found in a most curious place. Who is this woman, and why does she appear with you in a city far from Blackthorn Manor? Victor's face paled, his fingers twitching, as if to snatch the photograph. That's no one. A friend from London. Why does it matter? It matters, mon ami, because secrets are the currency of this house, and you are spending them recklessly. You have debts, and you have been selling family artifacts to cover them. The sapphire, perhaps, was too tempting. Victor's voice rose, sharp with defiance. I told you, I didn't take the sapphire. Yes, I've sold a few trinket candlesticks, old vases, But the brooch, I wouldn't touch it. Aunt Eleanor would never forgive me. Poirot studied him, noting the genuine fear in his eyes. Then tell me about this woman. Okay, she is connected, I think, to the ledger. I have found a ledger of payments to an unknown party. Are you being blackmailed, Victor? The word hung in the air, heavy as the mist outside. Victor's shoulders slumped, and he sank into a chair. Her name is Mrs. Langley. She's creditor of sorts. I met her in London, at a gambling den. She offered to clear my debts if I helped her with something. I didn't know it would come to this. Quoi? Poirot pressed, leaning forward. What did she ask of you? Gita hesitated, his voice barely a whisper. She wanted information about the manor, about Aunt Eleanor's past. I didn't know why until recently. She's after the sapphire, but not for its value. She said it would right a wrong. I swear I didn't steal it. I hid it to keep it from her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Where is it hidden? Victor shook his head. I won't say. Not until I know Emily is safe. Langley knows. About her being Aunt Eleanor's daughter. She's using it against me. The revelation struck Poirot like a thunderbolt. Mrs. Langley, an outsider, was the puppet master, pulling strings from afar. It's the ledger, the photograph. Victor's desperation pointed to a scheme far larger than a simple theft. But the sapphire's hiding place remained elusive, and the dagger's disappearance suggested a more immediate danger. That evening, Poirot gathered the household in the drawing room, the fire casting long shadows across the walls. Lady Eleanor sat regally, her hands clasped tightly, while Emily hovered near her, her eyes wide with anxiety. Clara's pen was still, her gaze sharp, and the colonel stood by the window, his posture rigid. Victor slouched in a corner, avoiding Poirot's eyes, while Grayson stood by the door, his face impassive. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice commanding silence. We are at a crossroads in this affair. The sapphire brooch, a symbol of love and scandal, has brought us together. But it is not the only theft. A silver dagger, a weapon of both beauty and danger, has vanished. And now I have learned of a stranger, Mrs. Langley, who seeks to unravel the very fabric of this family. Gasps rippled through the room. Lady Eleanor's teacup clattered against its saucer, and Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Clara's eyes narrowed, while the colonel's jaw tightened. Mr. Poirot, Lady Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her pallor. Who is this woman, and what does she want? She wants retribution, Poirot replied, his gaze sweeping the room. Okay, but her methods are those of deceit. The ledger I have found records payments to her, payments that suggest a long-standing grudge. And you, Monsieur Victor, have been her unwilling accomplice. Victor stood, his face flushed. That's not true. I never meant to hurt anyone. Us, Poirot snapped, his voice cutting through the protest. You have hidden the sapphire, to protect it from this woman. But you must tell me where, or the consequences will be dire. The room fell silent, every eye on Victor. He swallowed hard, then spoke, his voice trembling. It's in the greenhouse, under the third rose bush. I buried it there 2 nights ago. Poirot nodded, his mind already racing to the next step. Trespine, we shall retrieve it. But first, we must address the dagger. Its theft is no coincidence. Someone in this room seeks to shift suspicion, to muddy the waters. Hercule Poirot will not allow it. As the guests exchanged uneasy glances, Poirot felt the weight of the mystery pressing upon him. The sapphire was within reach, but the truth tangled in loyalty, betrayal, and hidden love was far from fully revealed. Grayson's confession had opened a door, but the ledger and Mrs. Langley's shadow loomed large. The night was young, and Blackthorn Manor held its secrets tightly, daring Poirot to unravel them. Chapter 8. The stranger in the moors, the Yorkshire moors, stretched endlessly before Blackthorn Manor, a desolate expanse of heather and gorse, shrouded in a morning mist that clung to the earth like a ghostly veil. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the manor's gravel drive, Kay's polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth, his gray eyes scanning the horizon. The air was heavy with the scent of wet peat and the faint tink of impending rain. In his gloved hand, he clutched the ledger he had discovered in Mr. Grayson's quarters, a slim, leather-bound volume that held secrets as heavy as the moors themselves. The cryptic entries, detailing payments to an unknown party, had ignited Poirot's curiosity, and now, with the manor's secrets piling like storm clouds, he knew he must venture beyond its walls to find answers. The ledger's final entry pointed to a transaction with someone at the Blackthorn Inn, a weathered establishment 2 miles across the moors. Poirot adjusted his Homburg hat, tightened the scarf around his neck, and set out, his walking stick tapping rhythmically against the uneven ground. The wind whispered through the heather, carrying faint echoes of the manor's tensions, Victor's deceit, Clara's fear, Emily's vulnerability, and Lady Eleanor's guarded dignity. Poirot's mind churned, piecing together the fragments of the mystery: the missing sapphire brooch, the stolen silver dagger, and now this ledger, suggesting an outsider's hand in the affair. Manjoria, he murmured to himself. The truth, it hides in the shadows, but Hercule Poirot, he will drag it into the light. The path to the inn was treacherous, winding through bogs that sucked at his shoes and over rocky outcrops that threatened to twist an ankle. Yet Poirot pressed on, his small, precise steps a testament to his determination. The moors were a world apart from the manicured streets of London, wild and untamed, and Poirot felt the weight of their isolation. He recalled the butler's confession, the way Mr. Grayson's voice had trembled when speaking of Lady Eleanor's sapphire gift from a lover, not her husband. The scandal, if exposed, could shatter the Blackthorn legacy. But Poirot suspected the true danger lay not in the past, but in the present, with someone orchestrating chaos from the shadows. After an hour's trek, the Blackthorn Inn emerged from the mist, its stone facade weathered by centuries of wind and rain. The sign above the door creaked on rusted hinges, depicting a gnarled thorn tree under a crescent moon. Poirot pushed open the heavy oak door, stepping into a dimly lit common room that smelled of ale and wood smoke. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the faces of a few patrons, a grizzled farmer, a pair of travelers hunched over their pints, and a barmaid wiping glasses with a rag. Behind the counter stood the innkeeper, a portly man with a beard like a bramble thicket, who eyed Poirot with suspicion. "Good morning, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice crisp and polite, despite the mud caking his shoes. "I am Hercule Poirot, a guest at Blackthorn Manor. I seek information, perhaps a conversation with someone who frequents your fine establishment." The innkeeper's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "What kind? Oh, information. We don't get many strangers out here, especially not ones in fancy coats." Poirot smiled thinly, undeterred by the man's gruffness. "A small matter of business. Name, perhaps, from a ledger. Payments made to someone here, at this inn. It is possible you know of such transactions." The innkeeper's face remained impassive, but his hands paused on the glass he was cleaning. "Ledgers, eh? Don't know nothing about that. There's a woman who's been staying here a few days, calls herself Mrs. Langley, keeps to herself, mostly, but she's asked questions about the Blackthorns. Might be who you're looking for." Poirot's interest sharpened, though his expression remained serene. "Mrs. Langley, you say? And where might I find this lady?" "Upstairs, room 3. But she don't take kindly to visitors," the innkeeper warned, resuming his wiping with exaggerated focus. "Mercy, monsieur, I shall be discreet." Poirot tipped his hat and climbed the narrow staircase, his footsteps muffled by a threadbare runner. At room 3, he knocked softly, his ear attuned to any sound within. A rustle, a pause, then the door creaked open to reveal a woman in her late 40s, her auburn hair streaked with gray, her eyes sharp and assessing. She wore a high-necked dress of deep green, and her posture was that of someone accustomed to command. "Yes," she said, her voice low and measured, with a hint of a challenge. "Madame Langley, I presume?" Poirot removed his hat, bowing slightly. "I am Hercule Poirot, a detective of some repute. I am investigating a matter at Blackthorn Manor, and I believe you may have information of interest." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "A detective? How intriguing. I'm afraid I'm just a traveler, Mr. Poirot, passing through this dreary corner of the world. What could I possibly know about the Blackthorns?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with the quiet intensity of a predator sensing prey. "Perhaps nothing, madame. Or perhaps everything. May I enter?" "Course. And the truth, it warms the soul." Mrs. Langley hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing to a small sitting area with a single chair and a table cluttered with papers. The room was sparse, its only adornment a faded watercolor of the moors. Poirot sat, crossing his legs with deliberate grace, and studied her. She was no ordinary traveler. Her hands, though elegant, bore faint calluses, suggesting a life of work, not leisure. Her eyes, too, held a flicker of defiance, as if she were measuring him as keenly as he measured her. "You claim to be a stranger, yet you ask questions about the Blackthorn family," Poirot began, his tone conversational but probing. "A curious coincidence, Nan, especially when payments from the manor's ledger find their way to this inn." Mrs. Langley's expression hardened, but she leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. "You're a bold one, aren't you? It's very well. I'll humor you. Yes, I've asked about the Blackthorns. They're a prominent family, and I'm distantly related. Haing's dispute, long buried, brought me here. But I assure you, I've no interest in their jewels or their scandals. A twat." His head, unconvinced. "An inheritance dispute, you say? Yet you linger in this remote inn, far from the manor's gates. And the ledger, it speaks of payments, regular, discreet, to someone here. Madame, are you the recipient of Lady Eleanor's generosity?" Her laugh was sharp, like the crack of a whip. "Generosity? You mistake the Blackthorns, Mr. Poirot. They're not known for giving without strings. If there are payments, they're not mine. I came to claim what's owed to me, not to beg for scraps." "And what is owed to you?" Poirot pressed, his voice soft but unyielding. "A share of the estate, a piece of history, or perhaps a sapphire brooch heavy with secrets." Mrs. Langley's eyes flickered, a momentary crack in her composure. "You're fishing, detective?" "I know nothing of any brooch. Looking for secrets. The Blackthorns have plenty. Ask Lady Eleanor about her husband's indiscretions, or her nephew's gambling debts. You'll find more than you bargained for." Poirot leaned forward, his mustache twitching slightly. "Madame, I do not fish. I hunt, and the trail, it leads to you. Tell me, what grudge do you hold against the Blackthorns, and why does your name appear in whispers, not ledgers?" She stood abruptly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "You're wasting my time, Mr. Poirot. I'm no criminal, and I've no patience for your games. If you want answers, look to the manor. That's where the real vipers nest." Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Very well, madame. But know this, Hercule Poirot does not abandon a trail. We shall meet again, I think." He left the room, his mind racing. Mrs. Langley was no mere bystander. Her defiance masked a deeper purpose, and her knowledge of the Blackthorns' secrets was too precise to be coincidence. The return to Blackthorn Manor was a slog through thickening mist. The moors, now a labyrinth of shadows. Poirot's thoughts churned as he navigated the path. The ledger tucked securely in his coat. Mrs. Langley's words echoed in his mind indiscretions. Debts, vipers. She was a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. The sapphire, the dagger, the ledger all pointed to a conspiracy, but the motives remained elusive. Was Mrs. Langley the mastermind, or merely a pawn in a larger game? Back at the manor, the air was thick with tension. Poirot entered the grand hall to find the guests gathered for tea, their faces a gallery of unease. Lady Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Clara Vaughan, the novelist, clutched her teacup, as if it were a lifeline, while the colonel polished his spectacles with unnecessary vigor. Emily, the governess, sat apart, her hands folded tightly in her lap. And Victor lounged with a forced nonchalance, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "Mr. Poirot," Lady Eleanor said, her voice cool but strained, "you've been absent all morning. Have you made progress in your inquiries?" Poirot smiled, his eyes sweeping the room. "Progress? Oui, Lady Eleanor. The moors, they are full of secrets, but they whisper to those who listen. I have learned much, but there is more yet to uncover." Victor snorted, his charm slipping. "More theatrics, Poirot. You've been poking around for days, and what do you have? A missing brooch and a lot of hot air." Poirot's gaze fixed on Victor, sharp as a blade. "Monsieur Victor, impatience is the mark of a guilty conscience. Perhaps you would care to explain your late-night wanderings, or the soil I found disturbed in the greenhouse." Victor paled, his smirk faltering. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was in my room last night." "Indeed?" Poirot said, producing the torn photograph he'd found in Victor's room. It showed Victor with a woman, Mrs. Langley. He now realized her auburn hair unmistakable. "And this, monsieur, a memento of a casual acquaintance, or something more?" The room fell silent, every eye on Victor. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "That's none of your business, Poirot. You're out of your depth." "Enough," Lady Eleanor snapped, her voice cutting through the tension. "Poirot, if you have accusations, make them plain. This house is suffocating under your insinuations." Poirot bowed slightly, unruffled. "My apologies, Lady Eleanor. But the truth, it is like a wound, it must be opened before it can heal. I shall return shortly with clarity." He excused himself, heading to Clara's room, his instincts guiding him. The silver dagger, reported missing by the butler, had been on his mind since dawn. The quay, if it was planted to frame Clara, as he suspected, it would be hidden where she could be easily implicated. He searched her small, cluttered room, his fingers probing the seams of her suitcase, the folds of her dresses. Beneath the mattress, he found the silver dagger, its blade gleaming, wrapped in a silk scarf. A clumsy attempt at a frame, but effective enough to cast suspicion. Poirot returned to the drawing room, the dagger concealed in his coat. He gathered the guest, his demeanor calm but commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began. "A new piece of the puzzle has emerged. The silver dagger, stolen from the Manners collection, has been found in Mademoiselle Vaughan's room." Clara gasped, her face draining of color. "Oh, is it possible? I never touched it." Lesquire raised a hand, silencing her. "I believe you, mademoiselle. The dagger was placed to implicate you, but the hand that hid it was not yours. It was Victor's." Victor leapt to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. You've no proof." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Proof, monsieur. The photograph in your room, showing you with Mrs. Langley, the disturbed soil in the greenhouse, where you hid the sapphire before moving it, and now the dagger placed to shift blame. You are desperate, Nan. Desperate to escape your debts, your mistakes, and the grasp of a woman who manipulates you. Victor's defiance crumbled, his shoulders sagging. I didn't mean for it to go this far. She, Mrs. Langley, she promised to clear my debts if I got the sapphire. She said it was her right, that the Blackthorns owed her. Lady Eleanor's face was a mask of fury and sorrow. Victor, how could you, after all this family has done for you? Poirot turned to the group, his voice steady. Mrs. Langley is no mere relative. She is a schemer, using Victor's weaknesses to strike at the heart of this family. It's a sapphire. It is not just a jewelette. It's a symbol of secrets she wishes to expose. But Hercule Poirot, he does not allow such schemes to succeed. The room erupted in murmurs, but Poirot's mind was already racing ahead. Mrs. Langley was the mastermind, but the sapphire's location remained a mystery. Victor had hidden it, but where? And what was Langley's true motive? Personal grudge, or something deeper? As the storm gathered outside, Poirot knew the final confrontation was near, and the Moors would yield their last secrets before the night was through. Chapter 9. The Ethical Enigma. The air in Blackthorn Manor's drawing room was thick with anticipation, a heavy fog of secrets and half-truths that clung to the ornate walls and velvet draperies. The fire crackled in the grand hearth, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the assembled guests, each one a study, intention some defiant, others fearful. All caught in the web of Hercule Poirot's meticulous investigation. The sapphire brooch, that glittering symbol of scandal, lay at the heart of the mystery. And now, as the clock struck 9, Poirot stood before them, his small, precise figure commanding the room with an authority that belied his stature. His mustache twitched as he surveyed the gathering. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, pale yet fragile, her eyes betraying a lifetime of guarded truths. Victor, her nephew, whose boyish charm had curdled into a mask of desperation. Clara Vaughan, the novelist, her sharp wit dulled by the weight of suspicion. Miss Emily, the governess, her delicate frame trembling with the burden of her hidden lineage. The colonel, his military bearing fraying at the edges. Mr. Grayson, the butler, whose stoic facade hid decades of loyalty and compromise. And, standing slightly apart, Mrs. Langley, the mysterious woman from the moors, her smile a razor's edge of calculation. Poirot's gray cells, as he so often called them, had been working tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of deceit, motive, and opportunity. Now, it was time to lay bare the truth, or as much of it as he deemed just Mesdames et Messieurs. Poirot began, his voice a measured cadence that cut through the room's unease. We have arrived at the denouement of this most curious affair. The disappearance of the sapphire brooch, as you all know, is no mere theft. It is a thread in a tapestry of secrets woven through the history of Blackthorn Manor, a history that some of you have sought to bury and others to exploit. He paused, letting his words settle like dust after a storm. Lady Eleanor's fingers tightened around her shawl, and Victor shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting toward the door. Poirot's gaze lingered on him for a moment before sweeping across the room. Let us begin with the facts, okay? He continued, pacing slowly before the hearth. The sapphire brooch, a gift not from Lord Blackthorn, as was long believed, but from a lover whose name has been erased from the family's records, is more than a jewel. It is a symbol of a scandal that could ruin the reputation of this house. Its disappearance was no accident, no petty theft by a passing opportunist. No, it was a deliberate act, orchestrated by one among you, with the intent to wield its secrets as a weapon. A murmur rippled through the room, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing it. Patience, Mies, Amos. To understand the crime, we must first understand the motives. And to understand the motives, we must peel back the layers of deception that each of you has so carefully constructed. He turned to Clara Vaughan, whose pen had crafted novels of intrigue, but whose own story was no less tangled. Madame Vaughan, your cryptic note, "The sapphire hides the sin," was a clever distraction, was it not? You wished to divert suspicion from yourself, for your past with Lord Blackthorne is a shadow you cannot escape. You worked for him years ago, and when you left, whispers of theft followed you. A newspaper clipping I found confirmed this, though you insist upon your innocence. Clara's lips parted, her voice sharp but unsteady. Told you, Monsieur Poirot, I took nothing. Okay? Those accusations were lies, spread by a rival to ruin me. I wrote that note in a moment of panic, yes, but only to protect myself from being falsely accused again. Poirot inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Perhaps, but your panic, madame, was not without cause. Cause? You knew the sapphire's true origins, did you not? Cause? You knew it was a gift from a lover, a secret Lord Blackthorne buried to protect his wife's honor. Your knowledge made you a target and a suspect. Clara's eyes flashed, but she said nothing, her silence a tacit admission of her precarious position. Poirot turned next to the colonel, whose weathered face had grown pale. Colonel Hargrove. Poirot said, "Your loyalty to the Blackthorne family is admirable, but it is not without its price. You confessed to a wartime disgrace, one that Lord Blackthorne helped conceal. Your gratitude to him binds you to this house, but it also makes you vulnerable to those who would exploit such secrets. You pace the halls at night, perhaps guarding something or someone." The colonel's jaw tightened, his voice gruff. "I've done nothing but protect Lady Eleanor's interest." "If you're implying I stole that blasted brooch, you're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot." Nan, Poirot said, waving a hand dismissively. "I do not accuse you of theft, Colonel. But your actions suggest you know more than you have shared. Perhaps you suspected who the true culprit was and chose to shield them out of loyalty." The colonel's eyes narrowed, but he offered no rebuttal. Poirot's attention shifted to Miss Emily, whose hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. "Mademoiselle Emily," he said gently, "your tale is perhaps the most poignant. As Lady Eleanor's illegitimate daughter, you have lived in the shadow of a secret that could destroy you. Victor, your cousin, discovered this truth and used it to blackmail you, demanding you reveal the sapphire's location. Your fear drove you to confide in me, but it also made you a pawn in a larger game." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears, but she held her chin high. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," she whispered. "I only wanted to belong." Lady Eleanor reached for Emily's hand, her own trembling. "Oh, my dear," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "If I had known sooner." Poirot nodded, his expression softening for a moment before hardening as he turned to Victor. "Sir Victor, you are a man of charm, but also of desperation. Your debts have mounted, and you have sold family artifacts to cover them. The sapphire, with its immense value, was a temptation too great to resist. You stole it, did you not? But you did not act alone." Victor's face flushed, his voice rising in protest. That's absurd. I admit I've made mistakes, but I didn't take the sapphire. You've got no proof, Poirot?" "Au contraire," Poirot said, his tone sharp. "The hidden compartment in the greenhouse, disturbed under moonlight, bears the marks of your hands. You hid the sapphire there, intending to retrieve it later. But you were not the mastermind of this scheme. Well, that role belongs to another." All eyes turned to Mrs. Langley, who stood near the window, her posture serene but her eyes gleaming with defiance. Poirot stepped toward her, his voice dropping to a low, deliberate cadence. "Madame Langley," he said, "you are the stranger in the moors, the one who has orchestrated this entire affair. You claim to be a distant relative of Lady Eleanor, but your true motive is revenge. An inheritance dispute, long buried, drove you to seek the destruction of the Blackthorne name. You manipulated Victor, exploiting his debts and his greed, convincing him to steal the sapphire. You planted the silver dagger in Madame Vaughn's room to frame her, ensuring chaos would shield your plans. Your goal was not the jewel itself, but the scandal it would unleash. Mrs. Langley's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly, her voice smooth as silk. A fascinating theory, Monsieur Poirot, but pure fiction. You have no evidence to tie me to any theft. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Do I not? The ledger I found in Monsieur Grayson's room, detailing payments to an unknown party, bears your initials, Madame. The innkeeper at the Moor's Edge confirmed your frequent visits, always inquiring about the Blackthorn family. In the torn photograph in Victor's room, it shows you, Madame Langley, whispering in his ear, a conspirator's bond captured in a moment of carelessness. A gasp escaped Lady Eleanor, and Victor's face drained of color. Mrs. Langley's composure cracked, her hands clenching at her sides. You're clever, Poirot, she hissed, but you can't prove intent. The sapphire's gone, and the truth with it. Not so, Poirot said, reaching into his pocket. He produced a small velvet pouch and opened it, revealing the sapphire brooch, its facets catching the firelight in a dazzling display. The room erupted in murmurs, and Victor slumped in his chair, defeated. I found it in the greenhouse compartment, Poirot said, exactly where Victor hid it. But now, Mies, Amos, we come to the heart of this enigma, not the crime itself, but the choice it demands. He turned to Lady Eleanor, his expression grave. Madame, the sapphire is yours once more, but its return comes with a price. To reveal the full truth, Mrs. Langley's plot, Victor's betrayal. The scandal of your husband's lover would protect justice, but destroy your family's reputation. Your daughter, Emily, would bear the brunt of public shame. Alternatively, I could withhold certain details, ensuring Emily's secret remains safe and your name untarnished. The choice is mine to make, but it is yours to live with. Lady Eleanor's eyes widened, her breath catching. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, what would you do? Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. Justice is not always served by exposing every truth. Sometimes it is served by protecting the innocent. I propose to return the sapphire to you, Madame, and to report Mrs. Langley to the authorities for attempted extortion. Victor, however, must face his own reckoning. He will reform, or he will face justice in time. Victor's head snapped up, his voice pleading. I swear, I'll make it right. I'll pay my debts. I'll silence. Poirot said sharply. Your promises are hollow until your actions prove them true. Madame Langley, your scheme has failed. You will leave this manor and face the consequences of your malice. Mrs. Langley's face twisted with fury, but she said nothing, turning on her heel and striding toward the door. The butler moved to escort her out, his expression unreadable, but his loyalty to Lady Eleanor unwavering. Poirot handed the sapphire to Lady Eleanor, who clutched it tightly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, she whispered. For Emily, for all of us. The room fell silent, the weight of Poirot's decision settling over them. He had chosen compassion over absolute truth, a delicate balance that left the manor's secrets intact, but its future brighter. As the fire burned low, Poirot stepped back, his work complete, his moral compass steady in the face of an ethical enigma that would linger in his mind long after he left Blackthorn Manor. Chapter 10. The final verdict. The Yorkshire moors stretched endlessly before Blackthorn Manor, the misty expanse a silent witness to the secrets that unraveled within its Gothic walls. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the gravel drive, his neatly polished shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of heather and the distant bleating of sheep. His gray eyes, sharp as ever, surveyed the manor one last time, its turrets piercing, the low-hanging clouds like the spires of a forgotten cathedral. The case was closed, yet the weight of his decision to shield Lady Eleanor's scandal and protect Emily's future lingered in his mind. A delicate balance between justice and mercy. Poirot adjusted his Homburg hat, his gloved fingers brushing the brim with precision. The moral compass that had guided him through countless cases now oscillated, not with doubt, but with the quiet gravity of a choice that would ripple through lives he would never see again. He had chosen compassion over revelation, a decision that felt both noble and heavy, like a velvet curtain drawn across a stage. But the curtain had not yet fallen entirely. There were final threads to weave before he could board the train back to London. The butler, Mr. Grayson, approached, his face etched with the weariness of a man who had carried the Blackthorne family's burdens for decades. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice low and respectful, "the carriage is ready to take you to the station. Lady Eleanor wishes to speak with you before you depart." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly. "Smisa, Mr. Grayson. I shall see her at once." The little gray cells, they do not rest until all is settled. Inside, the Manor's grand hall was quieter now, the frenetic energy of suspicion and deceit replaced by a somber stillness. The portraits along the walls seemed to watch Poirot as he passed, their painted eyes holding secrets of their own. Lady Eleanor awaited him in her private study, a room of dark oak paneling and heavy velvet drapes. She sat by a roaring fire, her silver hair catching the light like a halo, though her expression was far from serene. Emily, the governess now revealed as her illegitimate daughter, stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly, her face a mixture of relief and apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Eleanor began, her voice steady but softened by gratitude, "you have done more than solve a theft. You have preserved what little dignity this family has left. I am in your debt." Poirot bowed slightly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Madame, it is not debt that drives Hercule Poirot, but the pursuit of order." The sapphires returned. "The guilty are warned, and the innocent are protected. This, I believe, is the justice that serves Blackthorne Manor." Emily turned from the window, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You could have exposed everything, my birth, my mother's past. Why didn't you?" Poirot's gaze softened, though his posture remained impeccable. "Mademoiselle Emily, the truth is a sharp blade, and not every wound it inflicts is necessary. To reveal your mother's secret would have served no purpose but pain. You are her daughter, not her shame. And you, madame," he turned to Lady Eleanor, "you have a chance to mend what time has broken. This is the verdict of Poirot." Lady Eleanor's lips trembled, and she reached for Emily's hand. The younger woman hesitated, then took it, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that spoke of tentative reconciliation. Poirot observed silently, his heart warmed by the sight, though his expression remained composed. "There is one matter left," Poirot said, his tone shifting to one of quiet authority. "Victor, he has promised to reform, but promises are like the mist on these moors, beautiful but fleeting. Akai, I trust you will ensure he keeps his word." "Madame," Lady Eleanor nodded. "He will. Cut his allowance and arrange for him to work under Mr. Grayson's supervision. He'll learn the value of honor, even if it takes time." "Bon," Poirot said, satisfied. "And Mrs. Langley? She will not trouble you again. I've sent a discreet message to the authorities in York. Extortion is a crime they do not take lightly, even in the wilds of the moors." The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock. Clara Vaughan, the novelist, entered, her sharp features softened by a rare vulnerability. "Monsieur Poirot, I wanted to thank you. You saw through my bluster, my attempt to hide my past. I thought I'd lost my chance at redemption, but you've given me a clean slate." Poirot tilted his head, studying her. Mademoiselle Vaughn, your pen is mightier than your secrets. Write the truth in your stories, but let it be fiction. The world needs your wit, not your regrets. Clara smiled, a flicker of her usual spark returning. I'm working on a new novel. A detective, perhaps, with a mustache and a penchant for order. Poirot's eyes twinkled. I approve, but only if he is Belgian. As Clara left, Poirot turned back to Lady Eleanor. Madame, I must take my leave. The train to London waits. For no man, not even Hercule Poirot. But I leave you with this. The manor is healed, but its heart must beat anew. You and Mademoiselle Emily, you are that heart. Lady Eleanor rose, her regal bearing softened by emotion. You've given us more than we deserve, monsieur. If ever you return to Yorkshire, Blackthorn Manor will welcome you as family. Poirot bowed deeply, his hat in hand. An honor, madame, but for now, adieu. The carriage ride to the station was a quiet affair, the rhythmic clop of hooves against the cobblestone road, a soothing counterpoint to Poirot's racing thoughts. The moors unfolded around him, vast and untamed, their beauty a stark contrast to the tangled human dramas he had untangled. He thought of Victor, the charming nephew whose greed had nearly undone him, now facing a path of redemption. He thought of Mrs. Langley, the stranger in the moors, whose bitterness had woven a web of deceit only to be ensnared by her own ambition. And he thought of Emily, the governess whose quiet strength had anchored the manor's future at the station. A small, weathered platform under a sagging roof. Poirot stepped down from the carriage. The air was thick with the scent of coal and damp wood, and a distant whistle signaled the train's approach. As he waited, a figure emerged from the Meester man in a worn tweed coat, his face partially obscured by a scarf. Poirot's instincts sharpened, his hand tightening on his cane. Monsieur Poirot, the man called, his voice rough but polite. A moment, if you please. Poirot turned, his posture alert. And who might you be, monsieur? The man lowered his scarf, revealing a weathered face with deep-set eyes. Name's Thomas Reed. Sir, I'm a groundskeeper at the inn near the moors. I heard you were leaving, and, well, I have something to say about Mrs. Langley. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his curiosity piqued. Speak, Monsieur Reed. The little gray cells, they are always listening. Reed glanced around, ensuring they were alone. Mrs. Langley wasn't working alone. There's a man in York, a dealer in antiques, name of Silas Crow. He's the one who put her up to it, promised her a cut if she could get the sapphire. She was desperate. See, after losing her inheritance claim years ago, Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. This Silas Crow, he is known to the authorities. Reed shook his head. Slippery as an eel, that one. Keeps his hands clean, lets others do the dirty work. I only know 'cause I overheard him at the inn, months back, talking to Mrs. Langley about the Blackthorn estate. Poirot nodded slowly, filing the information away. You have done well to tell me, Monsieur Reed. Rest assured, this crow would not escape the notice of Hercule Poirot. Reed tipped his cap, relief evident in his eyes. Thank you, sir. I just want the manor left in peace. As Reed vanished into the mist, the train's whistle grew louder, its headlamp cutting through the fog. Poirot boarded, settling into a plush compartment with a window overlooking the moors. As the train lurched forward, he opened his notebook, jotting down a single name, Silas Crow. The case of Blackthorn Manor was closed. But the world beyond its walls was never without its shadows. In London, Poirot's first stop was Scotland Yard, where he met with his old friend, Chief Inspector Japp. Over tea in a cluttered office, Poirot relayed the essentials of the case, omitting the more delicate details about Lady Eleanor's past. Japp listened, his mustache twitching with amusement at Poirot's fastidiousness. So, you've saved another family from ruin, Poirot? Jap said, leaning back in his chair. But this Silas Crow business sounds like a new headache. Oui, mon ami Poirot replied, sipping his tea. But a headache for another day. For now, the Blackthorn family is safe, and that is enough. Jap chuckled. You're a soft touch under all that polish, aren't you? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Hercule Poirot is many things, chief inspector, but never soft. Precise, perhaps. Compassionate, certainly. But always, always in pursuit of the truth. A tea, back. In his flat at Whitehaven Mansions, Poirot sat by the fire, a glass of tisane in hand. The city's hum was a distant murmur, a contrast to the wild silence of the moors. He opened a letter from Lady Eleanor, delivered that morning, expressing her gratitude and enclosing a small photograph of her and Emily standing together in the manor's garden. A note in Emily's handwriting read, "We are learning to be a family. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot smiled, setting the photograph on his mantel. The case had tested his principles, forcing him to weigh the cost of truth against the value of mercy. He had chosen the latter, not out of weakness, but out of a belief that some secrets were better kept, not for deceit, but for healing. Sapphire was back in its place. Victor was on a path to redemption, and Mrs. Langley's schemes had been thwarted. Silas Crow remained a shadow on the horizon, but Poirot was content to let the future unfold. As he sipped his tisane, Poirot's thoughts turned to the broader tapestry of human nature. The moors, with their wild beauty, had reminded him of the untamed passions that drove men and women to betray, to love, to redeem. Blackthorn Manor had been a stage, its players flawed but human, their stories interwoven with secrets and second chances. Poirot's role was not to judge, but to restore order, to ensure the curtain fell on a scene of hope rather than despair. He rose, adjusting the photograph so it caught the firelight just so. The train to London had carried him away from the moors, but the lessons of Blackthorn Manor would linger, a quiet reminder that even the sharpest mind must sometimes bend to the heart's wisdom. Hercule Poirot, detective, philosopher, and guardian of order, closed his notebook and prepared for the next mystery, his moral compass steady, his resolve unshaken.